And greetings. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm your host, Salvador Cordova, and I'm privileged to be joined by Cindy Lincoln this late Saturday night, early Sunday morning. People have been getting on my case for being a night owl, and I thank you for your concern. And since I do have to get up early for church tomorrow, I should. That's something I'm working on, not to be up all night, and that I have a little bit of sleep disorder since childhood, and so in the middle of the day, and I end up being just a zombie sometimes. I remember when I was working as an engineer, a lot of times I'd have to go off into my car and just kind of pass out a little bit because it was just so hard to stay awake. It's probably the way that my eyes process light. My circadian rhythms are all messed up, and that was the case with my mom. But in any case, the topic of the show tonight is, and let me minimize, since Cindy's here, I don't need to show my backup computer, is really debate tactics. But I realized when I was describing debate tactics, and I will cover things like rhetoric more, because a lot of the creation evolution debate is actually subtle uses of rhetoric, especially by the evolution side, and the creationists are not recognizing it. A lot of times a smokescreen of obfuscation and misdirection is thrown up, and the creationists will just waste all their ammunition just shooting at smoke rather than hitting the target. They get just snookered into all sorts of arguments they shouldn't be getting into. Part of it is their own doing and not meaning to. And so as I was thinking about this, I also thought, because I was in the aviation, aerospace and defense industry for much of my professional life, and I can't run away from that. So I'm wearing my bomber jacket. It's funny because a lot of fighter pilots will wear bomber jackets. It just became a tradition. I probably will have to take it off because it's actually getting kind of warm in this little cubby hole where it's kind of my, I have 4 locations where I film. So Cindy, if you have any thoughts, I know this was sprung on you just like 5 minutes ago, and I said, hey, why don't you come on? So what do you think about debates?
I definitely have seen what you're talking about, and there's a whole list of things that are used: straw men and red herrings and smoke screens. And I've seen people in fact, I must admit, I'm guilty of doing it sometimes, of giving an answer that may be truthful, but it's not what they were asking, called evasion. And I'm trying specifically not to do that. I hope that doesn't characterize me, but I have noticed it.
Well, if it's inadvertent, it's, and besides, it's all, my point for all this is ultimately the facts will decide. So,
by the way, since you're chewing, and since you took off your bomber jacket, and since you were referring to the heat in your little cubby, as a woman, I just have to say, you need a better backdrop.
well,
a white sheet. Come on, Sal.
This was a green screen.
Uh-huh.
But it took too much CPU. The computer just couldn't handle creating the image. My computer couldn't. So yeah, I used on Zoom conference calls, I have like a tropical backdrop. But yeah, the background
takes up your bandwidth.
Yeah, for recorded
Oh.
shows it works.
Well, I shouldn't talk. All I have is my bedroom wall, so.
Well, that's all right. When it gets warmer, you'll probably see me filming from the second floor. I have 2 places I film from there, and that's going to be that's my favorite place to film. So anyway,
Yeah, I didn't mean to sidetrack you. Let's get to the meat.
yeah, so I just slapped together this PowerPoint, and I'll probably be editing it as we go. But before we move forward, let me just a little bit of the usual administrative stuff. I'd like to thank all the supporters of this channel, just viewers, and also financial contributors. I have a PayPal link if you want to give, and I'm grateful, and I want to thank everyone that has given. This channel tends to reflect kind of me because I am the owner and founder, and that means sometimes we wander into some nerd topics. We explore evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. I am an evangelical Christian with Reformed leanings, and I'm a young earth, young cosmos creationist. I used to be a theistic evolutionist. I used to be a Roman Catholic, and that's just kind of a history from where I came from. And over time, I've changed my views about a number of things. I eventually rejected naturalistic abiogenesis, naturalistic evolution, was an old earth creationist for a very long time. And it was very hard. It was a long transition to become a young earth creationist. That happened actually the more that I studied science. And perhaps over the next coming years, I'll be actually talking more about young earth creationism rather than just plain vanilla intelligent design. And so that's about the channel. And we tend to cater a little bit to graduate students, PhD students in science who are also Christians. And it's been great to be able to be friends with these people, and I get to communicate with them, some of them privately. Some of them are excellent scientists, but they have to be, tight-lipped about their personal views because they could be subject to a lot of persecution. And, we saw, people will give 2 versions of the story, but, I think that Dr. Change Tan, who's a young earth creationist, she came to the United States from communist China. She became a Christian here. She became a creationist. When she began to be a little bit more vocal about her views, she started to get pressured at the university, and now she no longer has a job at a secular university she was a tenured professor in molecular and cell biology. So, it's a tough community to be a part of, to be a science student, especially in biology, and also a Christian. People have succeeded in it with great difficulty and lots of God's providence. So tonight, the title of the show is Rhetoric. I don't know that I've done a lot of shows specifically dedicated to rhetoric, and I want to do more because a lot of evolution theory is really rhetoric. It's so void of facts. It's unbelievable. A lot of it is logical fallacies, circular reasoning, just piles of misleading rhetoric and understanding. And I began to really see it when I began to analyze the notion of evolutionary fitness and the mathematics surrounding it. And I realized this is a vacuous theory. Unbelievable. And there's lots of also non sequiturs in evolutionary theory. And I'm like, everything but science, for a lot of it, not all, but a lot of it is not science. It's just smoke and mirrors. And unfortunately, the creationists have sometimes gotten snookered to use their terms and ideas and you know, I get some requests to review ideas by creationists, and they say, "What do you think about this idea of fitness?" I'm just like, you're already starting on the wrong foot because you're using the evolutionary definition of fitness, and it's a mess, and it's going to result in your paper being a mess. So if you have any thoughts, Cindy, while I queue up my PowerPoint slide.
Well, I think it's really interesting about what you're saying. I'm shocked that you're going to broach the subject. And I've noticed it a lot that they just don't seem to be able to think. Like what you said about non sequiturs, they'll say things that just simply don't follow. And then the other thing you said about your definition of fitness versus our definition, or like the dictionary's definition, and our definition, or excuse me, their definition of evolution versus like the textbook definition of evolution, or it actually, and you're about to talk about World War II, but it's the same kind of a thing where you take a word, you change its meaning, and it becomes a code word for something different. And so you can, like Hitler referred to some of his youth groups as young Christian organizations. I can't remember the name he used exactly, but he would hijack Christian terminology to help him camouflage. And I don't know if that's similar or not, but I was just thinking about that as you were talking.
Well, where I'm actually going to talk about tonight is not to criticize evolutionary theory too much. I'm really more upset that creationists don't see the play, and they keep getting snookered. I'm just like, can you stop shooting at decoys and start trying to hit the target?
Yeah.
You're not cutting through all the misdirection, and you're playing right into their hands. And what you need to do, I'll give a very basic example. Something comes up, a new article by evolutionists comes up. First thing creationists do is a knee-jerk reaction and try to debunk it. I'm like, one, don't give more attention to garbage and focus on it. You're letting them define the debate. You're playing into their battlefields. That's a very wrong tactic militarily.
Yeah, you've talked to me about that.
Oh,
that
yeah.
I do that before.
Yeah. What you need to do is get them from the direction they're not expecting. And they will tell you that because of the things they don't talk about.
Or not necessarily even just the wrong, or excuse me, not just the direction they're not expecting,
Yeah,
but actually the direction that they're intentionally avoiding, such as
right.
abiogenesis and
That's
macro.
one. Or like, say, eukaryotic evolution or topoisomerase. What ends up happening, and I know this may not sound sporting, but Dapper Dino, he's made a mint of having a weekly drinking game. Now, I'm not into drinking games, okay? It's offensive to some Christians, but he's gotten a following and people just love it. And his staple is the Hovens, especially Kent.
Speaking of rhetoric and logical fallacies.
Yeah. And, you know,
he is masterful at that. I just have to say, I mean, he's the first person that came to my mind when you were talking about all the lists that you just made about logical fallacies and obfuscation and smoke screens and not answering the question, but saying something else.
And if you're referring to Kant, it's also just stating things that are just untrue and getting away with it in a short debate format. What Dapper Dino has done, and this is very smart of him, is he'll review videotapes of Kent's speech and then carefully say there's no reference to this or it's contradicted even in literature. Oh my goodness, speaking of which, look who's here. Beethoven.
Ben's gonna tell Dapper everything you say.
Well, I almost totally speak in glowing terms of Dapper. And I've told creationists, why don't you go and listen to the Tuesday shows? Because maybe you'll stop repeating the nonsense stop using the same failed arguments. And it's like, do you ever learn? I sometimes think, do you creationists ever learn from your mistakes? You keep fighting from the same playbook when you should be winning the arguments hands down. And what do I mean? Do I see this lampooning of the Discovery Institute videos on Origin of Life, or James Tour stuff, or Joe DeWeese's stuff? I don't expect it. The only lampooning would be by people that aren't really what I would consider good faith actors. When I've heard some of the criticisms of really quality stuff, it was misdirection and dishonest rhetoric. Dapper Dino, I can tell, even if I don't agree with his assessment, I sense he's trying to offer criticisms in good faith. And I'm just like, now, why would I say that? It's like, well, sometimes when he calls something out, I'm just like, yeah, I think he's right. I have more of that than I've had from anyone else. When I've heard him criticize creationists, I said, yeah, you're right, Dapper Dino. I wish the creationists wouldn't use that. And
well, and I can agree with part of that, but not all of that. Some of I do disagree with some of the things that he says, but
yeah, and I do too. Okay, I do too. But the proportion of times that I agree with him is a lot more than some of the other people that are critical of young Earth creationism.
And his sincerity is different than rhetoric.
Yes. So we can disagree, and sometimes I will sharply disagree, but I'm just like, I still think it's good faith. Because there are other times I've seen other critics like Dave Farina. That's what I'd call a bad faith critic. He makes stuff up, he gets called on it, and he still defends it. And in front of PhD professional chemists, he'll say garbage, and he's called out on it, and he'll still keep insisting. Good example, Farina said it's easy to make any biomolecule. Exactly. Every chemist who actually tries to synthesize biomolecules knows how difficult it is if you're trying to do it from scratch. And then Farina gave the stupidest excuse. He said, it's so easy, we made machines to do it. And I'm like, you moron, we had to make machines to do it because it's so hard to do from scratch.
Well,
and we're trying to save the human being from doing it. Huh?
Don't they have to buy the raw materials?
Oh, they have to do a lot. They have to buy it, and where you buy it from, they have to process it, and where they get a lot of the raw material is from living organisms.
Yeah. I was just listening to James Tour the other day, and he was talking about how not only can we not make a molecule, we can't even make a cell.
Yeah.
And the guy that's claiming with his scientific journal to have made a cell just used another cell and injected it into another cell or something strange like that.
So that's what I call bad faith rhetoric. It's misleading. It's not accurate. It's intended to conceal. And well, if you're hustling from grants, I can kind of understand that. But well, I'm not excusing it. I'm sorry, but
and I would like to just admit that both sides do it. Kent Hovind is on the other side and he does it. And I'm sure, you know, so it's not just all finger pointing. It's just, let's figure out how to do this right.
So Harry Stark asks, dogfight, what does Sal mean with dogfights? In World War II, well, actually, ever since military aviation, where airplanes would start to try to shoot down other airplanes, there's what they call a dogfight. And it's particularly between two opposing pilots, and they're trying to basically kill each other. And they call that a dogfight because I guess that comes from, kind of sadly, when we see dogs actually fight to the death, and they're just biting and trying to rip each other apart. A dogfight is kind of like mano a mano, you know, man to man fight up there in the air. And I guess that was just an adopted, a name that was adopted to describe when pilots of opposing side in their aircraft go after each other. It's called a dogfight. And as technology started to grow and evolve, a lot of fights are decided really outside of visual range when you don't even see the other guy. You just see a blip on the radar and you fire a missile at it. Sometimes you do get up close, and that's the least favorite thing in modern day warfare. You don't, if you have to fight the guy up close and use your machine guns, your Gatling guns, or short range Sidewinder missiles, then you're dogfighting again. And so that's what I mean. I hope that, hopefully that answered your question.
Kind of like close contact.
Huh?
Close contact.
Yes, close contact. And in World War II, sometimes you'd actually be blowing apart the other airplane, and debris from the other guy starts to hit you when you just blew him out of the sky. I know it's kind of savage, but as I said, my interest in this was because I was in the aerospace and defense industry, and I'd always kind of had a grim fascination with aerial warfare. And, you know, I can't explain it, why I was fascinated by military history ever since I was young. And I got into that industry. And I think plus aviation is just really cool. So thank you, Harry Stark, for the question, because if you asked the question, there are other viewers that probably were wondering what I was talking. And yes, I love the word joust. I think of it as a joust midair. I think that's pretty good, because the idea of the two knights jousting in battle for the fair maiden, yeah. Yeah, they call it either a joust or a tilt. And there was a song from the play and movie Camelot. Where are the simple joys of maidenhood? So Queen Guinevere is talking about how the simple joys of maidenhood and how nice it is for two knights to spill their blood for her. So
a simple joy. Yeah, right.
You know, I mean, the idea of, oh, the men are fighting over me. And it was a cute song. And she's talking about the knights, and, you know, where the two knights will tilt for her and let their blood be spilt for her. So
I hope the Lord is happy that we are contending for him. We're fighting for him.
Well, that instinct, just that instinct for the knights to joust, we see it through a lot of the mammalian kingdom, where the males will compete for the females, and sometimes like it can be very, very violent, where like I would see the rams lock horns and fight each other and bash each other. either the sea lions or walruses will just fight to control the harem, and then the lions. So it's kind of like that Casablanca song. It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. And I don't mean to make light of war, but the theme of men just fighting each other, just it's throughout human history, and it's throughout the animal kingdom. So anyway,
For
now, I'm sorry. Cindy, your microphone broke up. Your microphone broke up. I don't know what happened. The connection might be just a little tenuous right now. But this also does relate to debate. Some people like to fight and argue. I'm among them, but I actually have to try to contain that so it can actually have more civil discussions, because men especially like to kind of try to assert their dominance over someone else. So I can't speak for women, but the
and
internet,
be right.
yeah, the internet's dominated by males, and you'll see a lot of arguments on the internet between the males, and they're trying to position themselves, and a scientific discussion has to try to avoid that. And fundamentally, the creation evolution question is mostly, it should be mostly about science, but it ends up, at least as far as the internet goes, it tends to be fighting over personalities, and it's just a lot of theater. So if you
Pride.
have any thoughts before I throw up my slides here.
Pride. That's kind of what I was trying to say, is we don't want it to be just I get to be right.
Yeah. So there are a lot of bad feelings and fights. I try to keep this channel low drama. So let's think about why there are debates and disagreements in the first place. There's no debate about applied math. You won't hear these protracted debates about what the result of an equation is. There's no real debate about applied physics, no real debate about well-characterized chemistry. And let me see. And feel free to interrupt whenever.
Except for kind of, I mean, I totally see what you're saying, but now I'm thinking about Professor Dave. He was debating about a well done chemistry and trying to say 2 and 2 is 16.
Right, and I'm going to try to cover that a little bit. So why are there debates and disagreements? I showed that we don't have disagreements over these first three: math, physics, well-characterized chemistry. Debates happen when there is uncertainty, religious or philosophical belief that supersedes available data or capacity to know in principle, or bad faith actors, like lawyers defending a client they know is guilty, or pathologically closed-minded. I put Professor Dave in that category of pathologically closed-minded. And I know this will be harsh, but I would have to say the same of flat Earth proponents and geocentric proponents. So I'm sorry if I'm stepping on some toes. Yeah.
I'm not a flat earther, but I know friends that are, and I try and just not talk about that issue.
But that's what I call pathologically closed-minded. I've interacted with them, and I don't know what to say.
Right.
And regarding Dave Farina, there are origin of life researchers that are more open-minded than he is. And they're not, they're considerably more circumspect. And they certainly wouldn't say stupid things like, it's so easy to make any biomolecule. That's, in fact, we have machines to make it. That's a stupid thing to say. And he's still defending it as far as I know. So I call him a bad faith actor.
Well, and the shocking,
philosophically motivated. I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, I'm sorry too. It's just so grieving for me to see people like that influencing hundreds of thousands of people. And what you and I might be able to recognize as rhetoric, apparently a couple 100,000 people aren't able to recognize it.
So one thing I'll point out, and I don't know if I shared this discussion with you. I showed a film about psychic epidemics, how bad ideas can circulate. As the internet grew, there started to be pro-anorexia and pro-bulimia sites. And so you would get situations where these poor girls who are anorexic, they get in a quote unquote support situation and they encourage each other to become more anorexic.
Yes,
And
I heard you say that.
And I'm like, why? How can you look in the mirror and be taking your measurements as you're getting thinner and your skin and bones and you're saying you're fat? The social pressure, we don't quite understand how the social pressure is able to rewire them so that they deny reality. So that's an interesting question, how people can suspend reality because of their social context. They could be so brainwashed that something in their nervous system will take the input from their peers to even override their own perceptions of themselves. And so, I mean, it was revealing to me that 2 weeks ago when they talked about this, Abigail Schreier and Jordan Peterson, they said one thing they learned is if you have anorexics trying to be treated for anorexia in the hospital ward, you do not allow them to get together because they will reinforce their bad behaviors. And so this groupthink and this tribalism is very important to maintaining false beliefs. And it can be perpetuated by false rhetoric that is just good enough to be superficially believable. You get a clique around you and you can form a cult, a church that'll just believe anything. And
so you're going to apply that principle to both sides.
Yeah, sadly.
I agree, and I think we need to do that.
Sadly,
and that's confirmation bias, right?
Part of it can be confirmation bias, but there's social dynamics that I don't quite understand. We are wired as human beings to trust one another, and so even if we're confused, sometimes we would tend to give benefit of the doubt based on our social circle. If they say just go this way, you tend to follow it without questioning.
Well, because sometimes it means that you lose your whole social circle if you don't. So we kind of know how we need to behave in order to survive or fit in.
Yeah, sometimes the handed down knowledge is good, and sometimes it's often bad, and it was deliberately manipulated and inserted. That's why very evil nations will try to get after your society's children, to reprogram them, to give them new sets of morals, and that's really disturbing. They'll try to rewrite history, and I could go down that rabbit hole real fast at this point. But
well, and that's World War II, right? They did try and go after our children, and these communist countries still do that.
Yeah. So I do want to greet everybody. By the way, if I miss some of your questions to me, I apologize. Sometimes when I'm running a show live, uh, I, I can't multitask very well, especially running all the controls. Um, so apologies in advance. And Janet's here. God bless you, sister. So, you know, uh, they're bad faith actors. They're just people that are socially confused. They're bullied, and they'll just persist in their belief. And as I said, going back to my point, there's no real debate in math, applied physics, chemistry, certain fields definitely. And, you know, I have had some debates with people about math, and they didn't know math. They didn't make a living on math, and it was frustrating and difficult. And it's like, I give up. They're just so set in their understanding. I can't undo it. So I don't know what to do. I just move on. I give up. So what ends up happening is sometimes they think the question of creationism is they put it in the category of flat Earth and geocentrism, and that's not accurate, because we're talking about the past. We can make observations and experiments that contradict flat Earth and geocentrism in the present day. We can do that. So at least hypothetically, if someone built a rocket and they could fly it around the world, that would persuade them, hopefully, that the Earth is round. And there are principles, and I try to throw this out. I said, what's an evidence against geocentrism? And the one that I put forward a lot is the Coriolis effect. How do you get the Coriolis effect? That's predicted if the Earth is rotating. The Coriolis effect is, one expression of it is when you fire an artillery shell, depending on what hemisphere of the Earth you are and your position, it's going to be pushed to one side or the other. And when I was in the aviation industry, we had anyone who's firing off missiles or artillery shells, you have to put adjustments for the Coriolis effect. So you have to know where you are, so you can get your ordnance more properly placed. And so, they'll just change the subject, and it's like, I don't like that. You need to deal with it. And I also say evolutionism is faith-based. They don't like me saying that, but the major claims are. And by the way, that itself, whether it's faith-based or fact-based, that can be debated. But I will point out, Jerry Coyne himself, who's an evolutionary biologist, said, in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom, far closer to the pseudoscience of phrenology than to physics. He likened his own field to pseudoscience.
What?
And me having, yeah, oh, that's a famous quote. And people say, well, that's not what he really meant. And I'm like, I don't care, but he's right. Take it at face value. He's right.
Is that guy a creationist or a non-creationist?
He's an atheistic evolutionary biologist. That's why it held a lot of gravity coming from his mouth.
Can you read that again and give a definition for that one word at the bottom? He holds it closer akin to what?
Phrenology. Phrenology is a pseudoscience that says you can determine people's character by the shape of their head or something.
Okay. Holy cow, that is a very damning statement.
Well, I'll tell you, people argue with me in that, and I'd say, okay, look at the medical research teams. How many of any elite research team trying to figure out how biology works, how physiology, cellular physiology, you know, and they're trying to find cures for cancer. What proportion of their biologists are evolutionary biologists? I mean, I look at some of these teams, I'm just like, they're all biochemists, computer scientists, mathematicians, physicists, engineers.
In
There's
other
not a
words,
lot of
what you're
evolutionary.
saying is that evolution is irrelevant to their work.
Yeah, money talks. They don't hire evolutionary biologists for a lot of this. What good is someone that's just going to tell stories about like, oh, we evolved from that, we evolved from that? That doesn't do any good. We
Well, and
can.
yet at the same time, they will say that evolutionary thinking is responsible for cancer cures. Have you heard that?
They'll say all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So the problem with that is, how can you say that to the exclusion of common design? We could just as well say God designed all these creatures so we could understand themselves, and that we could have model organisms to help us find cures. That works just as well.
Yeah, I've heard you make that argument before. I like that argument.
Yeah, I'm like, you know, who cares about the bird dino transition? Does that help us find medical cures? You know, all you need to do is just, you know, if you want to, we actually do learn a lot about human biology by studying worms, yeast, even bacteria, plants. We actually learn a little bit about ourselves through studying plants. So there are a lot of things, a lot of organisms in God's creation that are not even close to our evolutionary line that provide us information. And I'm actually working on projects that can actually demonstrate this at the molecular level. And so people wonder why I'm so enthusiastic. We're moving forward on this. And it even looks, and I'm making a bold conjecture here, that if God did not provide us all these other creatures, we wouldn't be able to do protein folding predictions like with the Alpha 2 program. And that's going to be a very sophisticated discussion. This will probably float over the head of most evolutionary biologists, and about everyone. But it would be proof that God had a common design in mind even before all creation that would advance scientific knowledge. And so,
well, all of our medical cures have to be tested on other things first.
yeah, that's the responsible thing to do.
And not
And
only that, the argument that I always loved was we live in the same world. We all have to eat, so we're all going to need some kind of a digestive system. We all have to breathe air, and so we're all going to have, you know, lung cells or whatever. But I think that they were saying not just the common ancestry helps cure cancer, but I think they say that something else about evolution is how we get cancer cures. I guess studying adaptation or something, or selection. I don't really know
you see
how they
that
would
that's
possibly
that's
say it.
also, yeah, that's also rhetoric, because even in the common design creationist model, there is some adaptive change, if we'll call it that. So before so I'm just going to move on here, but the
Go
main thing I
ahead.
was trying to say, even the major claims of evolution are faith-based, and they can be debated. That's why there's a debate about this. You have to recognize a lot of their claims are not actually factual. Very few are.
But they actually say that, I mean, I heard Steve McRae from the Non Sequitur say evolution is a fact. It's science.
It's faith-based.
And I think they would be they would
Be
either
offended?
be very offended or just plain mock for
That's
us to
fine.
say that. But
That's
like,
all right. I'll compare it. I'll compare it to operational theories in physics. I'll say I can demonstrate like geometric optics in physics, which is a long-standing theory. You can test it, you can prove it, you can repeat it. You cannot repeat eukaryotic evolution. You're just accepting it on faith. You cannot repeat any of the major transitions. You're accepting it on faith. You cannot replicate the evolution of major protein families. You're accepting it on faith. And the way I'll prove that is I say, can you do an experiment that will demonstrate your point?
and I think this ties into your rhetoric thing. They'll
Yeah.
say, we've seen evolution. Evolution is a fact. Well, what they're talking about is adaptation, not evolution.
See, again,
Or
it's
maybe,
rhetoric again.
yeah.
Rhetoric, equivocation, and it, it thrives on lack of clarity. The discipline thrives on lack of clarity.
What is
Physics is the opposite.
equivocation?
Huh?
What is equivocation?
Oh, okay, great. This is a discussion on rhetoric. So let me just throw a Wikipedia article up. I'm really glad you asked me, because that's one of their primary moves. Okay, equivocation.
It
Yeah,
sounds
this is
like it
good.
might be what we were talking about before, where you replace one word, where you hijack a word and give it a new meaning.
Yes, exactly. And I'll just give some, but since we were on the topic, I might as well. And this is a move, I'm just like, creationists, have your radar up for equivocations in the middle of a debate. You need to this is such an easy play, and it's thrown at you all the time, starting with the word evolution from the start. And you have to keep fighting, you have to keep the other side from equivocating. Like, and two words that are equivocated a lot are evolution and fitness. It's the same play over and over, and you keep getting defeated by it. I'm just like, guys, recognize this. In logic, equivocation, calling two different things by the same name. Okay, it's calling. Oh, what's that clicking sound, Cindy?
I don't know, but I'll mute.
Okay, and just whenever you want to talk, you can just unmute yourself. In logic, calling two different things by the same name is an informal fallacy resulting from the use of a particular word expression in multiple senses within an argument. It is a type of ambiguity that stems from a phrase having two or more distinct meanings, not from the grammar or structure of the sentence. Okay, so here's an example. Since only man is rational and no woman is a man, therefore no woman is rational. Okay, a feather is light. What is light cannot be dark. Therefore, a feather cannot be dark. All jackasses have long ears. Carl is a jackass. Therefore, Carl has long ears. I hope you were amused by that. A lot of evolutionary thinking actually has lots of equivocation. It's unbelievable. A lot of its basis is equivocation.
Well, the thing you were saying about evolution and fitness, this isn't quite equivocation, but
it is. It is.
no, I mean what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
That insinuates that there's a guided process who knows what's fit and who is aiming the change in that direction. And then they'll turn around and say, oh, well, no, it's not a guided process because there can't be a guide. Therefore, it's a random process. But then they still talk about the concept of fitness. See what I mean? It's not quite equivocation, but it's some other kind of word game. Change the
Fitness,
meaning of
yeah,
the word.
fitness in the evolutionary sense is just making more babies. So, uh, that causes a lot of problems. Brian Lloyd says, hello, Sal. I'm someone who's thinking about doing future work for creation science. What fields need the most workers? I really respect Dr. John Sanford and his work. I work with Dr. Sanford. He's my colleague. I was a paid employee of his for 7 years. We still work together. And I would say it's very hard to be a professional creation scientist. The most valuable ones, in my opinion, are those who are professional secular scientists. So chemistry is a good field. Chemistry is definitely a good field. Cellular biology, medical research. So look at someone like Joe DeWeese. He's a professor of biochemistry. He's published in secular literature, and he's able to move forward the creationist argument. So that's where I would just say whatever could get you a job in the secular world is where I would go. Spending time trying to be a creationist apologist, I don't think that's necessarily that. There's not a lot of demand for it. There are not that many people. And the ones who tend to get the limelight are actually, some of their science is not so good. Kent Hovind's a good example. Sorry to pick on him. So if you look at James Tour or Marcus Eberlin, look how far they pushed the argument in terms of intelligent design, even though James Tour doesn't identify as an ID proponent. He's really heartened the entire creationist community, especially after he just pounded Dave Farina into the ground over abiogenesis. So
He's got some excellent videos.
yeah.
You have to keep your thinking cap on and your attention span.
So
but he's
go on.
But he's got some really great videos. And I was just going to say to that person that God is everywhere. So whatever he has gifted you with and given you the interest for, you will find him there.
I would also say, yes, amen. So wherever God has gifted you, try to develop it. Now, sometimes we do have to work outside of our field of what we love and might be gifted for just to make a living, and I get that. So may the Lord prosper you. I wanted to say, I've encouraged people to say, to actually report back, because I actually don't know where some of the fields are, but I think there is a need for creationist geologists. So if they're people doing earthquake research, field geology, petroleum geology, oceanography, those are my guesses. The geology argument can move forward. I can't tell you whether the job market is strong, unfortunately, but there's a need there. I would like to see more nuclear physicists.
I remember before I chose my major in college, I looked at the newspaper to see what kind of jobs are there. You don't want to spend 4 years getting a degree to find out there's no market for that.
Yeah, so, exactly. So I would encourage you, look for marketable skills. I don't know about the computer field, but believe it or not, that is so versatile, because a lot of science now is done with computation. And so it's not surprising for me to see some guy had a computer science degree. He's hired by a medical research team just like that. Because they're like, well, we need to do this computation. We need a computer scientist to help us translate our theory and experiments and our data into a computer system. So that's just, I hope that was of some help. I'm trying to get some people to be a little bit less in trying to do creationist apologetics, because most of what I've heard is bad. The people that do it really well are the ones who've done work in the secular world. And speaking of Dr. Sanford, just to let you know, I came on board as an engineer. I had a background in the aerospace defense industry. I had a master's in applied physics from Johns Hopkins. He hired me to do biology research. I said, Dr. Sanford, I don't know anything about biology. I mean, I know something about biology, but I don't have any formal training. And he said, don't worry, you'll learn it. I'm going to send you. And he said later, I'm sending you to the NIH. He paid out of his own pocket to send me to school at the FAES graduate school at the NIH. He did not send me to a Christian university to learn. And one other caution, a lot of Christian universities that claim to be Christian, I would almost, some people are saying you're almost better going to a secular university because at least you know where they stand. Some of these universities that claim to be Christians, they could be wolves in sheep's clothing, just trying to get your money. And some of these people end up just twisting your mind, and because you think that they have the label of Christian, that everything they teach is on the up and up, and it's changing. Examples of such universities are Wheaton. And so I hope that the current group of Christian students will at least network and say, this school is compromised. I'm very bothered. So we're kind of in a situation of flux. So get this. Dr. Sanford sent me to study about God's creation under evolutionists. Just something to think about.
My daughter lost her faith in a Christian college.
Oh my.
And a lot of them teach theistic evolution. And then the whole progressive Christianity thing is going on also.
Well, first off, my heart goes out to you for that. But we may have just helped someone just right now. This stream probably was worth it just for the fact we could convey that to someone who's looking at this. So, feel free to come back, and we might have these conversations. I try to talk to, I cater to students who are Christians and also science students. And I'm sorry I don't know why my camera keeps going out of focus. We lost Cindy, but I'll continue now. Is she back? Oh, there she is.
Not this again.
Oh, well. We'll move on here.
Sure. Yeah.
And so now you know about equivocation, and this is why it's good to have a discussion show, because sometimes I can be stopped and the audience can say, what did you mean by that, Sal? So let's continue. See if I can get this going here. So major claims of evolutionism are faith-based and can be debated. And the same is true for abiogenesism, or however you pronounce it. Dave Farina's faith in naturalistic abiogenesis was absolutely destroyed in a protracted quote-unquote debate with world-famous chemist James Tour. So why do we debate? And as I said, there are topics we don't debate, like basic math, physics, chemistry. So sometimes we debate to set the record straight when a viewpoint is wrong or poorly supported. There are some things that are definitely wrong that are in the public consciousness that need to get set straight, and they're not. So they're falsehoods that need to be dealt with. Some people debate to generate advertising and drama. Some people debate to learn. There are some bad motives why people debate, and they're dishonest and questionable debate tactics. So we have a variety of debates: live debate, a protracted debate, which means a controversy that may be argued in the public sphere for weeks, months, back and forth, either in text or internet or a combination of both. There can also be internal debate where when someone says, I'm debating whether to do this or that, or to believe this or that, it might be just purely, it may not be between two people, but one person that has two competing ideas in his mind. And that's actually a pretty important debate. I will point out there are good faith debates, bad faith debates, and there's this thing called Brandolini's law. That's a debate that's generated because it's not really a kind of debate, so it didn't quite fit in my list, but it was an important, it's a bad faith debate. It's where people will just make up stuff, and it's so wrong. And then in a short debate, it may seem that he's won it because you haven't been able to fact check. And he can throw out so many falsehoods, it's going to take forever to deal with it. So an example again is Dave Farina. He spewed out more garbage than I could imagine in 20 minutes, only 20 minutes. It took James Tour 10 hours of video to review and refute, probably an additional 40 hours at least of research to come up to produce his video, to
Oh my
all the
God.
research. And I know that's the case. So when I see Dapper Dino also do this to Kent Hovind, I'm like, Dapper, you demand, because that took a lot of research to refute some of the points. And you could see that some of the stuff Kent will say, I've seen this, it'll take someone a day of stuff to just tear it apart. Thunderfoot's videos on Kent Hovind are just epic. They're so well crafted. I'm just like, for every 5 minutes of garbage that Kent Hovind spewed, it probably took Thunderfoot a day to tear it down. And Thunderfoot was a professor or a researcher at Cornell in biochemistry, so the guy's good, and he knows his science. So that's what I mean by Brandolini's law. Dave Farina, Kent Hovind used a lot of Brandolini's law. It's a terrible debate tactic. It's not honest, and people get snookered by it, and creationists that begin to realize they got snookered by it end up getting resentful and feeling like they got lied to when they go off to university. If you have any thoughts before I go on.
Well, it's completely overwhelming, and it makes you stop the battle because it's too much an investment to try and debunk all the BS.
Yeah. So I've often said, why does Kent Hovind get all the attention? The other side would rather, okay, this I'm not saying life is fair here, but if you're a pro-evolution, pro-atheist, you're not going to debate. You're not going to try to make, let's say you're an anti-theist. Say someone's an anti-theist. You want to fight Christianity. You want to demean it. Okay, so let's say you're just so wanting to fight, you'll kind of just like not necessarily play fair. What you're going to do is you're going to take the worst representative of the position and highlight him. and that would be Kenthoven.
Pick the easiest target. Although I really don't think they would agree with you on that. But, and I've been dismayed recently to see that they are also picking on really quality ones like Cold Case Christianity, I forget, Wallace.
J. Warner Wallace, yeah.
And Tour, and who's Case for Christ? Case for Christ.
Lee Strobel, yeah. And he's an old Earth creationist.
I mean, I've just seen him picking on everybody now, and they're taking our best arguments like fulfilled prophecy, and it's just shocking. And
Yeah.
all they have to do is throw out a few things, whether they be true or not, whether they be well researched or just off the cuff, and then their followers will think that it's been debunked. It's very upsetting.
So now how do we, I'm sorry, I just have to keep moving on because I promised myself I'll try to get to church on time tomorrow. So,
Okay.
Especially since I'm meeting Mark Gottlieb. Oh, what did I do? Sorry, Cindy. Hang on. Let me try to recover. I did, okay, here it is. So how can we resolve a debate? How do we know a debate is, how do we know a debate is settled? Well, discoveries can decide the winner of a debate. Believe it or not, I'm going to list some things in the history of science where more data resolves debate. There's a debate on Ohm's law. So Ben Rex, if you're listening, he's our resident electrical engineer. That's one of the most famous laws in electrical engineering, Ohm's law. And I should know it because I took electrical engineering. Ohm's law, V equals I times R. Voltage equals current times resistance. That's Ohm's law. And if it's not, I'm in trouble. I knew the equation. I think that's the statement of Ohm's law. Voltage equals current times resistance. But there was actually a debate about that. And that's been long resolved. And there was a debate also about Maxwell's equations of electrodynamics. So how is that debate settled? It wasn't settled by having more arguments and debates. It was settled when Heinrich Hertz created radio waves and could demonstrate it. In fact, people were freaked out that he was creating these Maxwellian waves, which we now call radio waves. And he could make, I guess, like a meter or something move remotely. And there were no wires connected. People were, their jaws were dropping. Yeah, oh, here it is. Yeah, Ohm's law. I equals V over R, which can also state it equals, if you multiply both sides by R, it's also R times I equals V, or V equals I times R. But thank you, Harry. I just stated a different form, but I'm glad I still got that right. So it was settled. It wasn't settled by more argumentation. It was settled by experiment. And so that is an example where the scientific method actually prevailed. You gather data and you have experiments. So for operational things, we call that operational science. Operational science deals with science in the present day that you can repeat and you can run experiments on. What they call origins or forensic science is trying to reconstruct something in the past, but you can't formally repeat it. And that's why evolutionary theory and abiogenesis theory can never be up to the standard of experimental science. There was an atomic theory debate. There was a long debate whether atoms actually existed. I mean, that's unthinkable now. But in Darwin's time, that wasn't a settled debate whether atoms actually existed. They had the term molecules, but it was an ongoing debate. Atomic theory. So some debates could take decades, maybe centuries to resolve. So for the Christians, the way some of the debates are settled, like as far as historical figures, biblical archaeology. We're discovering cities now and names and places and events that we didn't have evidence for. So for a long time, before we had certain archaeological discoveries, we didn't know like the city of Nineveh actually existed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not Nineveh, there could be other cities. We didn't have confirmation that King Hezekiah and there was Sennacherib. We didn't know that Sennacherib existed for sure until, like, I think the 19th century, we discovered the Taylor prism. So prior to that, there were these schools of thought, the higher criticisms that were just saying that these weren't, you know, these weren't real people or something. But when you get data, that settles the debate. Even something like the 5 porticos, when Jesus healed someone at the there was a lame man and there was a pool of Siloam and or pool of something and pool of Bethesda. I'm sorry, pool of Bethesda, and he was saying, no one can bring me to the pool when the angel stirs the water, and he couldn't get healed, but Jesus healed him there. And people read that and all this theological, rich theologies developed around it. But there's an archaeological thing there because people for the longest time said that didn't exist. There's no architecture that has 5. It's always square or, you know, it's rectangular. 5 is absurd until we had an archaeological discovery that discovered the 5 porticos.
Wow.
And, yeah. And that lent credibility to the entire Gospel of John. So that's how to settle debates. It's God's providence that we're able to get data points to confirm things. Even in my lifetime, I remember shortly, a year or so after I became a Christian, I was reading the book of Nehemiah. And we wouldn't, you know, I was, for one, when I read it, it had that sense of being historical. And I really like the book of Nehemiah. In the last 15 years, we finally discovered the wall of Nehemiah. Now, if one is struggling with faith, wouldn't that help you? Would that help you along if you had this data point rather than more debate? The fact that God provided people out there digging up in Jerusalem, they'd find something. So this is how I think debates can be settled. Sometimes more argument is not necessarily going to settle the debate. More data will. If you have any thoughts, Cindy.
Very interesting. I mean, that gives hope. And that's like what we're trying to say is Christianity is scientific. We don't have to fear more data points.
Exactly. If you have faith that you're right and that God will provide the data, you don't have to fear. And why do I have, and I'll go into why I have faith about this. One of them is creation versus abiogenesis. In my lifetime, I have seen like, oh, we're so close to solving the origin of life problem. When I was being taught in junior high, they're showing me the Urey Miller experiment, Jacob Bronowski, you know, the lightning strikes and the early Earth, and it generates amino acids, and like, yeah, that's what they're teaching me. It was also around that time, and it started to get popular for a while. They're like, well, this is too difficult. You need something more, like, say, space aliens. And then after space aliens, it's gotten to multiple universes. And I did a reading of two peer-reviewed papers that suggested the odds are so remote we would need multiple universes we can't see or test or ever verify. So this is the state of abiogenesis today. And anyone who watched the James tour just crushing of Dave Farina can see that the case for naturalistic abiogenesis is in bad shape, and it's not looking like it's going to get better. So anyone who is a creationist as far as the first life ought to be more of a creationist now, because when I looked at the comment section of James Tour's videos, people were just praising God. That probably wasn't his intent, but people can't help but praise the Lord when they could see the complexity of even the first few chemical steps on the stairway to life. So,
not just complexity, but impossibility of existence without divine intervention.
yeah. So I'm saying, the other side, look at the abiogenesis side. They had actually, at least in principle, the chance to settle the debate. If they were able to come through and show that something as complex as the first cell could evolve, they could have won that debate.
And Sal, that's why they took abiogenesis out of the definition of evolution, and they won't debate it. They take it out of the debate on a couple of occasions that I have witnessed. And it used to be wasn't that the whole purpose of evolution from the get-go, was an alternative?
Historically, I don't know, and it doesn't matter whether they compartmentalize it or not. We know that the first life is not explained by evolutionary theory, even according to evolutionary biologists themselves.
And if they don't want to talk about it, then we can frame like you were talking about, don't let them frame the debate. That is the debate. God either had to create us or we got here on our own.
So we could just say at least a more modest statement is you can postulate and have a good argument that the first life was a miracle. So if they argue with you, anyone argues, they'll say, well, you can't prove it. And I'll say, well, you can't prove the opposite. I've just given you a lot of data to show, and James Tour more than me, really, why it's unreasonable to think this is by any natural process. It's not a matter of, they'll come back and say that's an argument for ignorance. It's like, no, it's not. It's an argument from what we know. When we say a 747 will not emerge from a junkyard when a tornado passes through it, that's not an argument from ignorance. That's an argument from what we would expect given what we know about physics. And that sort of idea is extensible to the first life. And they'll say, oh, there's natural selection. I'm just like, no, there's not. You don't have heritable genomes. And even if, to the extent you do assume some sort of selection in the chemistry of favored reactions, the favored reactions are for destruction, not construction of what we see in a cell. So I think
just continues to blow me away that they don't
delusional.
accept it, that
They're
mutations are 99% deleterious.
Yeah.
Or what's the word? Damaging. They're not guiding you towards more fitness. They're stealing your fitness. They're eroding your fitness.
Right. So let's move on. I'm sorry to cut you off, Cindy.
That's all right, hon.
All right. I would actually say now parts of the evolution debate are now starting to be settled by the data, even though they don't want to concede that. Let me see what my next slide says. Yeah, there's our there's our degenerate Dave Farina. So in my lifetime, and I've showed this graph before, where I say red is kind of the evolution side, winning, green is the creationist side. In my lifetime, I've seen these arguments. They were all red, or even arguments I didn't know of. But as the decades went by, it became more green. In 2002, I was going through a crisis of faith, 2000, 2002. And I began to just kind of backslide a little bit and say, I don't know. And I didn't hardly have any green there. But then by 2010, data came in and I got to see the arguments more. I got more convinced. 2020, it's even more green. And even in the last 2 years, it's improved more. So by the way, so we could say like abiogenesis, the universe occurring by miracle, the miracles needed for evolution of complexity, miracles needed for universal common ancestry. That's roughly the intelligent design argument. But you can if you extend it, you can get the young Earth, young cosmos creationism argument. So core component of young Earth creationism is intelligent design. If you're a young Earth creationist, you believe in intelligent design. The converse isn't true. Do you have any comments here, Cindy? Before
I guess I was just thinking that you listed like 3 things that required a miracle, but I actually think that if we didn't take everything around us for granted because it's always there, I think we would realize that every single thing around us requires a miracle.
yeah, that's pretty much true. That's what they call the fine tuning of the universe. And then all biological life is extremely improbable. And the
Just
argument,
the presence of oxygen, the presence of water, the presence of anything.
okay, so we'll just move on. And then, so young Earth creationism will accept intelligent design, but then it has to deal with things like trying to establish that human life is young, the fossil record's young. We have to still deal with the problem of what we call the appearance of shared errors. But even, oh, okay, this was, since you're here, I actually saved this for you. Charles Darwin said, the progenitor of innumerable extinct and living descendants was created. So he believed, well, he said, didn't necessarily mean he believed it. He said that the first life form was created. He postulated that.
Yes, you said that in the last show
Yeah.
I was on with you, and it blew me away.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, he could have been talking out of both sides of his mouth, and I'm just not going to go there. I just wanted to point it out. It's there right in the Origin of Species. The progenitor, which would be the first life, of innumerable extinct and living descendants was created. So this is the first life he postulated from which all things descended. So when you have the tree of life, he said the base of the tree of life was created. Now, in other writings, like I said, it's both sides of his mouth. He talked about a warm pond where he believed it could have emerged by itself. So I'm just going to leave it at that. That's the thing about reading Charles Darwin. You can come to totally different conclusions about what he really believed because he'll make conflicting statements.
Which is kind of exactly how we started off, by saying using the same word to mean different things and just talking out both sides of your mouth.
Yeah. So even in the last 2 years, my views have changed. So you can see the timeline is a little different from this slide. So I'm now dividing it from 2016 to 2022. A lot of my views have changed. you could see it's becoming very green now as of this year. And maybe some point in the future, it's going to be all green. I mean, if the trend continues to go. Now, this is just my personal view and assessment of the data. Not everyone will see it this way, but especially Dave Farina. But so people ask me, why am I a young Earth creationist? Because I've seen the trend. I've seen it over the last 40 years.
Well, and a lot of the anti-creationists are trying to say that we're just creationists because we were raised in it, and that, you know, if we went to school and we were educated, we wouldn't be. But I just found some, well, I've known about this for a while, but a lot of us, it's the opposite. We weren't raised in the church. We were educated with evolution, and just saw that it didn't make any sense. And the more we studied it, the more green we got.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. I was raised in the Catholic Church, attended secular public school, and I accepted evolution. I actually thought it was a beautiful theory. I mean, I like the idea of eternal progress. I mean, that resonated during that optimistic era.
Yeah, I remember thinking we were going to evolve into heaven on earth.
Yeah, that's
like,
basically it.
Don't mind the maggots. Like,
and so, you know, I did not come from a church or a viewpoint that said evolution's evil. I did not. And I never thought it was a good argument anyway to say you shouldn't believe it because it's evil. I said, well, the facts are the facts. And I know this may sound scary. It's like, well, Sal, were you willing to leave the faith if evolution were true? I'd say, yeah. Because at that point, I would think there's no need of a creator, and the Bible asserts a creator. I would begin to think that there were no miracles.
Yeah,
but
I keep thinking about what you're saying and what they keep saying about evolution not involving abiogenesis. And in my mind, it's distilling more and more into there was a God who did it, or there wasn't a God who did it. That's the real crux of the matter.
Oh, just going back to Darwin's quote here, just to set the history. When he said the progenitor of innumerable extinct and living descendants was created, he's circumventing abiogenesis as being part of evolutionary theory there. So I wouldn't be too quick to say that they are separating it because they don't want to deal with it. They had already separated it. And it just helps.
Okay, I hear you.
Okay. So
because yeah, I was actually trying to say, and I've been argued with on this, but the way I learned it, you know, I'm 60, so I learned it 40 years ago, but was that evolution was from the get-go an affront to the church.
that is true.
And so they're trying to get away from that now, and they're trying to say, oh no, we're not, you know, there's lots of theistic evolutionists, and there's lots of Christians who believe evolution. Or
good night, Bent. Thanks for dropping in. Say hi to Dapper for me. I'll go on.
I think that was it. I'm still holding on to that, even though people keep criticizing me for it. But I really, I think that the roots of evolution aren't in science. They are in an effort to get an alternative explanation for how we're here without a God.
I will say, you know, before we make an overarching claim, there's some subtleties to it. So when Pasteur did his experiment, there were atheists who were on the opposing side, but there were a few theists, just like there is today, where we have Christians on the evolution side. And
Yeah, but I think the only reason is because they think that evolution is science.
well, well, I got to tell you, there's some strange things that happen among theologians, and I can't figure it out. So I just don't, at this point, I don't care because it's all moot. If the science is now, if the data is telling me now that life is a miracle, that's all that matters to me personally. I don't like getting too much into the history because it's not very uplifting. Reading works of atheists and these kind of very strange theologians. I'm really not into
No,
that.
and I wouldn't really want to focus on history either, but I
Right.
think right now, today, what we're doing, the purpose of all of this, we need to not get sidetracked on rhetoric, but to stay on to frame the debate, not allow them to frame the debate on whether a wolf can turn into a dog or some stupid thing like that. But no, the crux of this argument, why I'm in this, is because it's God versus no God. It's appreciate God's amazing gifts to us and beauty and genius versus, oh, it's all by chance. Oh, but it might be guided sometimes, but there's no guide.
There is a quote by Will Provine, professor of evolutionary biology at Cornell, where also John Sanford was a research professor, and he said, evolution is the greatest engine for atheism.
Thank you. I mean,
that's an approximate quote. If someone's invited to Google that, evolution is the greatest engine for atheism, whether it's intent or not, I'm not going to argue because I don't try to read minds. I get in trouble trying to do that.
You're right. And it's not correct to use intent as part of that statement. You're right.
Right. But it is still the great engine for atheism. A lot of people will become atheists because of evolutionary theory. John Sanford himself said his budding faith was destroyed in high school because of evolutionary theory. I have a recording of him. He granted me an interview. He is my boss. So I kind of leveraged the fact that I worked for him to get that interview.
Is it on your channel?
Yeah, it's on my channel somewhere here.
Can you link it in the description below?
Yeah, let me look for it. And I'll need a few moments. So if you want to share some thoughts while I look for it, and I'll give you a link.
I'm glad that you didn't necessarily object to what I was saying, that it really is God versus no God. Even though there are Christians who believe in evolution, I think it's just because they think it's science, because it's what all the universities teach. And
Well,
to actually think about there
yeah.
being this grandiose global conspiracy to teach a lie is very hard to believe.
Can I just add something subtle here, though?
Please.
So we have the atheists. They're enthusiastic about it, despite the fact that it doesn't have a lot of good evidence for it at the molecular level. And there's some strange theologians out there. So the Christians, and some people think that the science is good. So we have the creationists, we have the Christians who think the science is good. And because Dr. Sanford and myself are theistic evolutionists, I'm going to grant them that there are sincere believers that think the science is good.
Yes, I didn't mean to imply they weren't sincere believers.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm saying the science is bad, and I think that my fellow Christians who are theistic evolutionists, most of them don't realize it. There are some who should know better, and I have my doubts about them, let's just say at a personal level. So,
Well, and I think part of it is they just haven't discovered yet that the science is bad.
yeah. And they're going to get the feeling that creationism doesn't have good arguments if all they focus on is Kent Hovind, which on Dapper Dino's channel, I'd say he's gotten a huge following because he's done a very good job of deconstructing Kent Hovind's work. He's done us a great service, but the creationists don't appreciate what he's done for us. Instead, Dapper Dino gets vilified for doing what he did, and I'm just like, thank you, because you saved me time. I don't have time to waste on garbage of Kent.
Well, and you
Unfortunately,
were mentioning that other person, Thunderfoot,
yeah,
and of course Aaron Ra, Pelagia, AJ, they're all well, yeah.
well,
And
I
I'm
think
not going to say that I agree with all of what they say. And I
right.
do still agree with a lot of Kent's science, or I don't know how to call it. I do
Um,
believe the original Earth was a Garden of Eden. I do believe the Earth is 6,000 years old. I do believe there was a flood and that dinosaurs coexisted with humans because they were made the same day. And that's the basics of the tenets.
but but the way
So,
Kent arrives at that outside of the Bible is flawed.
and the way he not just arrives at it, but evidences it, maybe.
Right.
I don't know.
So what I wanted to say is, why would we be interested in looking for evidence of creation outside of the Bible? John 10:38, Jesus said, "If you do not believe me, believe the works." He's inviting people to look at the physical evidence.
Well, and
You
God
can you can
says,
extrapolate from him saying, just look at the miracles. That's how you know that he's Jesus. But I would just say there's a principle there. God is inviting us to study his works because they do declare his glory. If
exactly.
if you're willing to look, and that God has provided, I have to say providence. If I were born 100 years ago, it makes me shake to think I might probably be an atheist. But I lived to see the day of people like James Tour to convince me that abiogenesis didn't happen naturalistically.
It's
It
full
looks like
on
a miracle.
ludicrous.
Yeah, it's ludicrous to think it's anything but a miracle at this point. And so just moving on, and I'm sorry to keep you awake so long too. Anyway, everything's turning green. So now the actual fighter pilot tactics. Sorry, I was saying everything's turning green. I forgot I didn't share. I can see my screen. You can't always, the viewers can't always see what I'm looking at here. Things are turning green. So now to the actual World War II fighter tactics. Here are two famous fighter pilots, one from World War II, and on the left, that's Donald Flash Gordon, and on the right is Randy Duke Cunningham from the Vietnam era. And Donald Flash Gordon said, "I never had a dogfight. I usually got head on or tail on. They never saw us coming. That's the way to fight a war." And I'll go to that quote.
Wow.
All right, so, and I'll explain why I'm quoting this. Randy Cunningham says, if you get into a fair fight, your tactics suck. If you get into a fair fight, your tactics suck. If you're not cheating, you're not trying. That's kind of a joke. I like that one. You're not cheating, you're not trying. Okay, so these are debate tactics. All right. I'm going to try to explain, I'm going to relate this. First, I'll show the fighter tactics, and then I'll try to explain what I'm describing in debate.
Well, first of all, you're not really saying debate tactics if you're going to preclude it with that statement about unfair debate. So what you're going to say is these are unfair debate tactics.
You should, okay. Let me try to explain a little bit. If you get into debate where all the facts are not on your side, and the other side has as many facts on his side as yours, your tactics suck. You're debating something you shouldn't be debating.
I see. Okay.
I mean, now, unfortunately, sometimes it's forced upon you, okay? So like if they're having me debate the distant starlight problem, it's like, okay, I do have to address it. I've gotten into a fight I'm going to lose right now, maybe not in the future. I can tell you, for 30 years ago, if I got into debate over the Big Bang, I would have definitely lost. I now have a fighting chance to at least say the question's open. So, or what you can do is you don't go right out there and say the distant starlight's problem solved. You define the debate and say there are possibilities. That's a lower threshold. So don't accept debates you know you're going to lose.
I get it.
And these people, I just see these creationists, they'll say, I'm going to prove creationism. I'm just like, I'm going to prove Noah's flood in 1 hour. They don't exactly say that, but they, you know, that's how this theater is advertised. And it's like, don't set yourself up for failure. And that's what I really meant. And so what does it mean if you're not cheating, you're not trying? The idea is you're not going to play fair with an enemy. You're not going to try to, you're going to try to dominate him and use every advantage you can.
Well, I wouldn't want to do it in a manipulative way, though. I'd want to do it in a fair way.
Ethical.
Yes.
Ethical.
Well, and forthcoming and sincere, not hiding things, not obfuscating.
Right. Exactly. So you could strike that final one, if you're not trying, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. You can just, I just thought that was kind of funny.
I do too.
But you're up there in a dogfight, you're not going to give the guy a fair chance.
You're not thinking
He's going to try to kill you, you know? And so maybe that's not applicable to debate. I just thought it was really funny. But
all's
the idea
fair in
of
love and war.
Yeah, all's fair in love and war. But there are some elements to this that you can kind of extrapolate. So I wouldn't take it too literally. So when I say, you know, dogfight, don't get in these fights where you just go round and round in circles. Because actually the old dogfights, some of them, the way that they were conducted, is the airplanes would actually, they did try to circle each other and try to get on the other guy's tail, or get in a position where you could shoot someone. And a lot of times they would just, one dogfight I heard, these guys were just rotating and spinning around each other for like half an hour. And that was, you know, turning their guts, but they knew they had, one of them's not going to walk away alive. And they were turning and trying to move their airplanes, and it would be just a draw until finally one got a little advantage. You know, they keep maneuvering around each other. The longest dogfight I heard was about 30 minutes. And that's not anything you want to do. So that's why Flash Gordon here said, I never had a dogfight. I usually got head on and or tail on. They never saw us coming. That's the way to fight a war. So that's not, I know that may not sound very chivalrous, where you try to shoot the guy behind the back and he doesn't see you. But that's the way to fight. That's from an ace fighter pilot. And I'm going to extend that a little bit to some of the debate tactics that I see creationists. It's just like, guys, you got to learn how to debate and choose your topics better, because you're getting into these fights. You have so much data, you ought to win a lot more than you are, and I just get upset. And so what I mean by win, look at James Tour, how he crushed Farina. You ought to do that a lot more in your debates, and you're not winning it.
Do you
You
feel
have the
like
tools.
Farina and his 200,000 views, do they feel like James Tour crushed him, or do they feel like Dave crushed James Tour?
Well, one, I think a lot of people, I don't care.
Yeah, it may not matter.
It's what the data says. Like I said, these anorexic girls, it's not about reason. And the internet, this is a psychic epidemic where people will be just deliberately blind if they want to be, and I can't stop that. But when I've interacted with these people, they can't defend it on the science. So I did
And we
get the
can't-
sense that a lot of people were just practically laughing at Farina. Certainly college professors would not think he had a good performance. I can tell you the sentiment around kind of the YouTube sphere and the, kind of in our circle, they didn't cover Dave Farina at all, because he sucked.
Well, and I guess that is a very important Christian tenet. It is not our job to change anybody's heart or mind. It is our job to present the truth in the best manner possible.
So here is the boom and zoom topic. I mean, boom and zoom tactic. By the way, I have had debates with other people, and it's mostly for advertising or if I've been invited. I don't think it's necessarily the best way to communicate. So the boom and zoom tactic is, let's say you're a fighter pilot, you're high. And just like when you're like riding a bicycle downhill, you can get up a lot of speed. So the idea, you have an advantage if the other plane is this, about the same characteristics as yours, but you're flying higher, you definitely have an advantage. Because what you could do is as you dive, you get all this extra speed here, and you can attack him and then zoom out and just, kind of like going down a hill and then climbing up. And the advantage of this is this guy is moving a lot slower than you are. And when you're very fast, that means you can come after him, and he can't, because you're able to move faster, you can get out of his way faster. And that's the boom and zoom tactic. That's definitely not a fair fight. And so the idea is you start with an overwhelming advantage. You start with an advantage. You engage your opponent, and then you disengage. You don't want to get in a situation where you're just going back and forth. You're just going back and forth, and you're arguing over definitions. And I just cringe when I see creationists get into debate about definitions. Okay, so I'll give you a kind of a painful example of this. Evolutionists will say, intelligent design is not science. And a creationist will accept that debate. I'm just like, why? You're going to go, first thing that'll happen is you'll spend half an hour defining what science is. You've done
Wasted the whole debate, wasted
you
right
wasted the
there.
whole debate. And I saw Dr. Dan, evolutionary biologist, confront Michael Behe on the definition of irreducible complexity. Went 45 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And he was talking, and I said, Dr. Dan, that was hard hitting but fair. And I said, I got to agree with you, kind of. I said, whether I agree with you or not, you've shown me creationists should drop the argument. And I have noticed that they quietly stopped using it anyway. And I'm like, see, at least if they're learning slowly, but at least they're learning. So this is what I mean if you get into this dogfight. We call it also, another word for that is a turning fight. Don't want to get in a turning fight where you're just trying to chase each other's tail. What you want is boom and zoom. You get him and then you're gone and he can't touch you. James Tour did a lot of boom and zoom on Dave Farina. Dave Farina was just setting himself up for a target. So what James Tour did is he took like sometimes even a 10-second clip and he would just pounce on it. So, so Dave Farina just basically laid himself out here, where James Tour could see what his argument was. And then you can kind of say that James Tour kind of got some altitude, so he got to research and think about it. And then when he got enough research, he made a film and he pounced on Farina. And then the idea of boom and zoom is, see, you can dive, you get a lot of speed, you shoot him, and then you climb up again and rinse and repeat. And you just keep coming and just abusing the guy till you blow him out of the sky. I mean, and the other guy can't fight back. That's the advantage of boom and zoom. It's a tactic where the other guy can't fight back. Farina couldn't fight back. James Tour had his channel and didn't, it prevented Farina from getting the microphone because then he would just spew out more nonsense. and James Tour would have none of it. I mean, James Tour on his channel could just fire away and Farina was defenseless. Not only did James Tour have the facts, but he owned the microphone. That's boom and zoom. So that was.
Yeah, I actually think there's a lot to be said for not just going off the cuff, but having time to think about it.
Yes. And oh, yes. To get into, what we call it is get into position and gain altitude. Gain altitude and be in position to intercept. And that's exactly right, not off the cuff. So if you want to debate someone, do it like James Tour. And to an extent, to a very good extent, Dapper Dino has used boom and zoom against Kent Hovind. He would look at the clips, same for Thunderfoot, especially Thunderfoot. He would look at the clip, and it might be just 1 minute of what Kent Hovind is saying. He'll spend a day gathering evidence, and he makes a very snazzy looking video with a lot of humor in it, and it's just devastating.
It's
That's boom
doing
and
your
zoom.
homework.
Yeah. So off the cuff debate, live debates will preclude the boom and zoom tactic, but Dapper Dino has done it really well. He shows them, okay, creationists may not like it, but what I wanted to say, Why don't you learn from your opponents once in a while, please? They're going to show you how it's done. And even though I don't always agree with Dapper Dino, I agree with him enough. And same for Thunderfoot. I said, the way to do that. So that's the boom and zoom. This is so when I said we have kinds of debates, we have the live debate and then one that's protracted. You want a protracted debate so you can do this boom and zoom tactic. If you have any thoughts, and I'll move to the next slide.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so that's one. All right, so we do get also other situations. See, that's a classic fighter tactic. Don't want to get in a turning fight. Don't want to get into a dog fight. Okay.
And even if like you were talking about the debate with Behe where they spent 45 minutes wasting trying to, dickering over the definition of science. So that means you have to be introspective enough to catch yourself and say, okay, what is the main point? Like, even if you enter into a debate with a piece of paper in front of you that says, what is the main point? So that when they try and take you off into a side fight, you can hone in on the main point. Again, let's bring us back to the topic.
Yeah, and I love Michael Behe. He was very important to me personally and professionally, but coining a new buzzword, irreducible complexity, it invites the sort of debate that happened on Dr. Dan's channel. And I had to say, I score a victory for Dr. Dan, because if you can't win it on the facts, if you can't win evolution on the facts, at least you can deny the creationist or ID proponent a victory. So you basically have a draw, which in some cases that's a victory because you didn't let the other guy prevail over you. You're able to walk away and not let the guy win.
Basically, you just gave him a straight arm for the whole time.
Yeah.
And I do want to say I wasn't intending to criticize Michael Behe either.
Right.
All of us have gotten sidetracked. I mean,
Right.
even with your kid, you could get into where 45 minutes later you say, oh my gosh, he sucked me in again. So I wasn't intending, just trying to help us debate better. And by the way, regardless of if you call it irreducible complexity or not, the facts are that a cell has to have all of its component parts all at the same time, which is all the poor guy was trying to say. You can't have the membrane evolve without the nucleus, without the chromosomes, without whatever is all in there. That's what Michael Behe was trying to say with the term he coined, irreducible complexity. And I still haven't figured out how anybody could refute that. And I know that you do, but
well, what I say is just show God's creation and examine the probability. Topoisomerase, we saw that. Or any of the discoveries, you don't have to use the word. That's all my point.
Yeah, you don't have to use the word, but the principle is true.
It's a good strategy. The principle is a good strategy. Doesn't mean you'll win it all the time, but it's a good strategy to find things. By the way, Dan Strait is wishing you the best. Thank you. So this is Kent's X. Someone was asking, this is Kent's X.
Who's Dan Strait? Do I know him?
I don't think so. I don't know him personally, except through the channel, but
Nice to meet you, sir.
Yes. So thank you for the kind words to Cindy. I'm trying to, I'm grateful for the community to show support to a victim.
And I wanted to extrapolate a little bit. So not only can a cell or an organism not exist without its the parts that it needs, but it can't exist in isolation either. Even the most single-celled, simple life form, it still needs food. It still needs air or whatever it's going to breathe. It still needs its water environment, or the simplest like moss or lichen or fungus. It needs a host. It needs sunlight. I mean, irreducible complexity can go all the way out.
Right. So, so I just say, all you have to do is just, what I say is just go to the probabilities and just think about it. No need to go to these. I'm going to keep emphasizing, don't go into abstractions. It's going to get you into trouble. You'll end up in a dogfight. You want to avoid a dogfight. And I'll tell you how we're able, again, Dapper Dino and James Tour are very good at how to pounce, but then also, yeah, we'll just keep moving on here.
Yeah.
So we have and I'm gonna get myself in trouble. You should not lose a fight when facts are on your side. You should not lose a fight when facts are on your side, and creationists keep losing fights. One example is all this use about information theory and code arguments. And there's a YouTuber who's my friend who loves using that. I'm just like, you're not necessarily losing a fight, but you're not winning a fight. Like the way James Tour won his fight with Dave Farina. So anytime you start talking about information theory or what a code is, see, that's what'll happen.
So you mean because it's too abstract or conceptual instead of concrete?
Yes, simple as that. I'm not saying it's false, but why go there? Because, okay, if I were a evolutionist, I'd say, what do you mean by information? And you'll give one definition. Then they'll say, well, I look right here in this dictionary, it gives a different definition. So what do you mean by information? What do you mean by code? How can you prove that biology is a code? All you're doing is coding other people's, but how do you prove it? And I'm just like, see?
I've actually had trouble following those arguments where they're using that terminology too.
Exactly. And I wanted to say, people are criticizing me, and the people criticizing me, it's like, I have more biochemistry than you have. I'm an electrical engineer. I've studied information theory at the graduate level. And I'm telling you, this is not the way to go. If you studied Shannon's theorems, I've studied them. And I can tell you this is not helpful. And you keep going back to the same play that's not helpful. People like Change Tan and Rob Stadler have given you the playbook to win. So I keep mentioning James Tour, but there is a book you can actually study. And you don't have to use the code argument. You don't have to use the information argument. You could use textbook chemistry. The problem with information is you get so many definitions of them. And I'll give one example. You have a JPEG file. How many bytes of information are in it? You're going to get so many different answers. And I see that's already part of the problem. So what ends up happening is you end up getting into a dogfight, a turning fight. And it goes back and forth over definitions, and you do everything except argue the physical evidence.
Yes, that's a good synopsis. The physical evidence.
The
Don't
physical
let them
evidence.
get you off topic.
Right.
And
exactly
stick to the physical evidence. I like That's what I was trying to put into words.
So I just say, stop adding confusion factors and buzzwords and abstractions, and that includes irreducible complexity. Just use accepted terms, and you can develop probabilities. I also need to take a swipe at the philosophers and theologians. They generate endless and stupid debates by piling on superfluous abstractions and sneaking in all sorts of fallacies that get perpetuated.
You just did it yourself, Sal. Those are all too big words. Can you put that into comprehensible input?
Okay, a superfluous abstraction.
Okay, superficial, not so meaningful.
Yeah. I mean, they use all these buzzwords that you can't understand. You think it's something profound, and like it's not probably ever even really well defined. And because people don't understand it, you think you've actually solved something. And all you've done is created confusion. And after a while, it's just like a pile of manure. Why can I say that? I've studied mathematics. You don't have that garbage going on in mathematics. When we have definitions in mathematics and we can write theorems from it, there's no argument over the meaning. Like the fundamental theorem of calculus, if you know, you can open these books. They'll have their own definition of certain things. Even though some textbooks will define things slightly different, you still don't have arguments about the conclusions. Not at the basic levels. And you can actually have lifetimes of applied mathematics. You're not going to get the debate I see in the philosophical community. That's why I call a lot of it piles of manure. It's like, can you come to a conclusion yet that is sensible that other people agree on? That's why I say there's no debate on the basics. You know, in the higher realms or lower realms of math, you know, kind of at the edges, yes, there'll be arguments, but you know, not for the mainstream that's applied in every day that fuels our technology. And so that's why I just call it piles of manure. And the theological debates just go on, if you haven't noticed, especially on the internet, people just screaming at each other. And it's like, you never have that in mathematics.
So stick to the concrete as much as possible.
Yeah. Stick to the concrete. Go to where there are not. So even though mathematics isn't concrete, it is structured in a way that there's not disagreement. So go to things that there's not going to be disagreement. And mathematics is very important for science. So
common ground.
Yes. Chemistry and physics, basic chemistry. There's some parts of chemistry that are not well understood just because some of the experiments are very difficult. But there's some things, James Turr covered a lot of basic chemistry, a lot of basic organic chemistry. So did Change Tan and Rob Stadler. That's why their arguments were so forceful, because they're arguing physical facts that are well accepted and experimentally verifiable. And just to repeat again, contrast with applied mathematics. There's no debate and there's great clarity. Clarity. It's beautiful.
I try really hard to do that.
And so what I highlight is examples of arguing facts. The most recent Discovery Institute videos on abiogenesis, each of them are only 10 minutes or so long. They're done very well. The topoisomerase video was done very well. And I talk about it because I've researched it and published on it. Another example, of course, is James Tour's Bludgeoning of Dave Farina. I could also add there Rob Stadler and Changed Hands book, Stairway to Life. And one other thing, you know, you may have a very good argument, is if there's silence by the other side on a topic. So if a well-known creationist, if there are topics the creationists talk about and there's silence on the other side, like the faint young sun paradox, you know, you probably have a really good argument. You should use it more.
Interesting. And also maybe don't be uncomfortable with the silence. Let the silence speak rather than trying to fill it. Unless, you know, like if you don't, unless you have something good to say.
Yeah, so let me show an example. I went to the Talk Origins website, which was a staple for evolutionists trying to defend their belief system on the internet, and this is for decades. I looked on their entry for abiogenesis. They only had 2 measly entries. And I said, okay, this tells me you are, I said, they had all the stuff on human evolution, all the stuff on dinosaurs. They didn't have anything on abiogenesis. I said, okay.
Wow, very interesting.
They had like 2 small articles that weren't very good. And I'm like, okay, this tells me this is what you argue. The next thing that they don't argue is eukaryotic evolution. In fact, not even the creationists put that on the table. So when I have been arguing that, I don't get people, I actually kind of kidded Dapper Dino. I said, if I have a video that I consider good, I'd like you to try your drinking game on my video. I want to see if you actually get through the whole video without taking a single drink, because my points were so well made, you're not going to challenge them, and you're not going to take a sip for anything stupid I said.
Use
Of
them
course,
as a testing field.
yeah. I don't think he'll do it, not because
No, I bet he will.
I don't think he will, because it's not gonna be a fun evening, and Tuesdays are for fun to have, you know, their little celebration game. And honestly, I wouldn't want him to try, because he's having such a good time roasting Kent Hovind every week.
Well, maybe he'll have to do a Thursday night show called Give a Creationist a Chance.
I'll tell you what he should do. If he's gonna do that, make it a Monday morning show. That would be about the right spirit. So anyway, so I don't see them do a lot on eukaryotic evolution. How about the evolution of major protein families? They don't have that. So I could just list a whole bunch of things, and I'm just like, okay, we'll just keep moving there. What's my point? Why do creationists, the evolutionists will throw something out like this new like the Tiktaalik fossil, or all this stuff that Erika finds with human evolution? It's like, guys, why do you go there? You have all this stuff, and the first thing you'll choose is a dogfight with Erika on something she's very good at. You do not dogfight someone in the field that they're good at. You use your best abilities against their weakest skills. Because if you're not cheating, you're not trying.
Well, okay, so
I know that's not
thinking
very
2
sporting. That's the
things.
spirit. That's the spirit of you're not cheating, you're not trying. That means you're going to use your best skill against their weakest point. That's what I meant. Go on. I interrupted you, Cindy. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't want to undo your point. I'm just thinking, would the converse be true? The things that they talk about most, would that mean that those are the arguments we can avoid because they're trying to obfuscate the main point, like abiogenesis, or the fact that the Big Bang is they're also trying to take that out of evolution because that's ridiculous. We know nothing cannot explode, and it certainly wouldn't produce order.
Well, I'll
But
tell you the way to deal with it.
if you ignore the things that they harp on the most, assuming that that's not their weakest spot, I guess, like the new Discovery Institute videos that I just uploaded on my channel because they're so great. You were just talking about them, how they're only 10 minutes long. Well, one of the things they talk about the most is like whale evolution. And I guess, well, DI did one against the whale evolution model, and it was really, really super
Really
awesomely
good.
good.
Okay, so
And
there
I
is a
guess,
time to engage. There is a time to engage.
yeah, and I guess
There
my
is a time.
criteria isn't necessarily looking for where is their weak spot, but I'm looking at their audience and saying, what is drawing our Christian prodigals away from the faith? What is fooling our kids? And
Okay.
that's what I want to hit on.
So the way to deal with it, okay, just like in fighter tactics, if you exploit the opponent's weakness with your strongest strength and blow them out of the air, you've won. Because what that does is it renders moot. It renders moot everything else that the other side has said. So,
Yeah.
like, for example, when you see the miracle of abiogenesis, you begin to think, oh, you can't ever take that away from me now because it's a miracle. So no matter what you say about chimp human evolution or whatever Erika says about it, you can't take away the fact that life is a miracle, at least at that level.
Yeah,
So,
which renders it moot. That's a good point.
So,
Wow, Sal.
someone said, you showed that Darwin himself separated abiogenesis from his theory from the very beginning. Yes. And that was kind of a side benefit of when we were talking about that, Cindy. So just, again, I don't want to argue what their intents are. That's just the fact that they separated it out, and you
But
don't
for
want to get,
me,
if
it's
you're,
still a crux of the argument. And if I'm going to be framing my own debate, that's a
well,
big point.
I'm afraid you'll end up in a dogfight. You don't want to get in a dogfight.
Oh,
That's what I'm trying to spare you from.
no, but abiogenesis is what you were saying would be a boom and zoom.
Yeah. Throw it on there, but don't tie it to evolutionary theory. That's what I meant.
Right.
And don't get into an argument about, oh, they did that because they want to avoid it. You don't have to go there. Trying to figure out what people's psychology is going to get you into trouble. It'll invite, even if you're right, it'll invite all sorts of rabbit trail discussions. You want to argue God's creation. You want to keep throwing facts. Hammer the facts. So there is a fighter tactic I wanted to show. So there are times you might have to debate when you don't have all the facts, but you believe the facts will be on your side eventually because there's a trend of discovery, or you have some intuition. I can definitely say that was the case with abiogenesis. 40 years ago, we didn't have as many facts as we have now, that I had the intuition that the creationists were right. Every year since, I had rejected evolutionary theory, rejected abiogenesis. The arguments for creationism got stronger. Same for eukaryotic evolution. We're starting to crush that now. People don't realize we're really crushing it now. There are also things with evolution of the solar system and quote unquote evolution of the fossil record.
Say that again. You're really crackly.
Creationism versus evolution of the solar system, or evolution of the fossil record. So that's my fault because I didn't show the slide.
Well, and something was crackling.
I'm hearing it on your end.
When that happened earlier, I muted out and it stayed crackling. So I also unplugged my charger and it stayed crackling.
Oh, okay,
So
when I
I
talk,
don't think it was
crackle.
me.
Okay, there is crackling on my end too. I'm sorry. They're crackling from both ends, which is really bad, and I don't know why. That's just too bad. We can also debate whether we can continue to explore something. Because the evolutionists have said the human genome is mostly junk. And that actually stifled medical exploration. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So we could at least say it shouldn't be a foregone conclusion that the human genome is mostly junk. Stop insulting medical researchers and calling them ignoramuses and crooks, which Dan Grauer did.
Is
And
Dan
that's pretty
Grauer
disgusting behavior. That's disgusting behavior by a scientist, by the way.
is Dan Grauer a
Evolutionary
creationist?
biologist. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then wouldn't that mean he's calling himself a crook?
No, he's calling the ENCODE researchers, who are medical researchers who believe in evolution, he's calling them crooks and ignoramuses because
Even
they
though
said
he's an evolutionist.
they're both evolutionists. So one evolutionist was calling out another set of evolutionists.
That's
But
confusing.
okay, so the ENCODE NIH project was claiming that the human genome is mostly functional. So they believe it evolved, but they're claiming it's functional. Evolutionary biologist Dan Grauer said that can't be because if ENCODE is right, evolution is wrong.
Oh my heavens.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan Grouse.
And he was livid and he said, you guys don't,
Wow.
he was saying, you guys don't understand evolutionary theory, so to speak, because otherwise you wouldn't be saying that. And they're like, well, we don't care. We're trying to find cures for all sorts of diseases. And Grauer looked really bad. And his behavior, I think, was just reprehensible. That's an example where evolutionary theory is hindering scientific progress because we
Sounds
have
like a place
continued to
to make
find,
a quote mine. They
yeah.
call it quote mining, but that's a really good quote.
So whoever told you about evolution helping cancer, it's like, well, look at all the bad things it did for medical science. And they're, so it's like you have to show that it helps to the exclusion of other theories. And the fact that it's hurt medical science is a good indication it's probably not correct.
Say that last sentence again.
Sure. The fact that evolutionary theory has contributed to hurting the advance in medicine is also an indication it's not a good theory.
Well, yeah, if they would acknowledge that, or if we could make a real strong case for that.
Yeah. So
Because
we'll go on.
they're denying that. And the only good example they have of how evolutionary theory is helping to cure illnesses is that dumb, what is it, malaria or something that you get malaria, but it helps you not get syphilis or something stupid like that. I can't remember.
I have to contest something here. He's saying evolution works with or without a creator. Evolution doesn't work. That's what's the issue. Is just the theory of evolution, is it consistent with what we know about cellular biology, biochemistry, and physics, statistics, probability, population?
Homeostasis.
Oh, there are just lots of things where it fails as a theory. And it would need miracles. Eukaryotic, I mentioned eukaryotic evolution is one example. But there's also the problems with archaeal evolution. Trying to get a common ancestor for archaea, bacteria, and eukaryotes will lead to, you would need to invoke so many miracles it's indistinguishable from special creation. So I have to say evolution theory fails. And again, why isn't this talked about? What did I say? Where their weak point is where you argue where your strength is, and we're not doing that enough. So let me mention.
Can
Go
I
on.
try something out? So evolution works, is what he said. But in reality, what we see is a pattern of extinction, not evolving upwards. We see a pattern of extinction and we see a pattern of stasis, where the fossils from a
right.
long time ago are the same as the creature today.
Okay. So this is a subtlety. It's a little bit outside of, well, actually it is part of our topic today. You know, what are the best tactics? I don't argue that it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to prove that evolution doesn't work mechanistically, even under the assumption of an old universe or old fossil record, don't argue the fossil record, argue molecular. If you get into the fossil record, you're going into weak ground because there are a lot of abstractions and things that cannot be directly measured. When you get at the cellular level of cellular biology, you can definitely see the problems there. And that's why I said argue molecular stuff, because it's clear and it's unambiguous, and you can also calculate probabilities directly.
Yes, but
so you had the
isn't
right
it
sentiment,
true?
but I'm just, you had the right sentiment, but in the wrong field.
But it's very, very clear and not ambiguous that what 85% of everything is extinct. If you look at what was originally there in the fossils, that just shows extinction.
Well, they will come around and say, well, that's just the process of natural selection. So if you want to try it, you can.
Well, that's why I wanted to try it out. Yeah.
Yeah, try it out. And if you don't feel...
What about stasis? The fossil record also shows stasis, because no matter how far back you go, if it's living today, it hasn't changed.
See, this is exactly the kind of fight they want, where there's ambiguity. Because if you could prove absolutely that there were not a lot of intermediates, if they could, then they wouldn't have a case. They'll just say, well, we don't see it because we just don't see the intermediates, but they had to be there, or something like that. I see that's their argument.
Yeah, I've seen websites against living fossils.
So if you saw my video that I wrote for Steve McRae, that I did on protein families, it's unambiguous. Not only will you have stasis, but one thing can evolve from the other, and it's pointless to even suppose there's a common ancestor in the major protein families. You don't even have to go to the fossil record. You could go, and you don't need any expertise. You could even visually see it. So I gave a model of how to argue this.
Yes, I remember we had a discussion about that.
Yeah. And
I said, you like microscopes and I like rocks.
I know, the thing is, the thing that we like to argue may not be our best argument. It might have to be more technical.
Okay, I don't want to hold you up. Go ahead.
Okay. So there are other things, like I'll say, you could at least say, if we don't have the facts all on our side, we could at least say we shouldn't shut down exploration. So 40 years ago, the Big Bang looked on solid territory, but now it's starting to come apart. And so it's easier now to argue, let's just keep an open mind. Same for low energy nuclear reactions versus traditional approaches. So the low energy nuclear reactions could help the creationists solve the problems in radiometric dating. And there are experiments that may help us also solve the distant starlight problem. So if you have a debate you can't win, you can, totally on the facts, you could say, let's at least allow the possibility of a new discovery. Don't shut down exploration. Because the other thing is, if some of these things turn out to be different than the mainstream, there could be some exciting science there, like with low energy nuclear reactions. So the young Earth creationists could benefit from that, but so will all of society, which means more green energy. Green energy. Oh, okay.
I really want to hear more about that.
Sure. So there's this fighter tactic called the Lufberry circle. And it's like, you've heard the term, they circle the wagons. You can also circle the airplanes here. And what that does is that if you're getting attacked, your buddy can help you because he's covering your back, basically. Everyone's covering each other's back. So you've heard the term, I got your back. So a Lufberry circle means the guy behind you in the circle is going to protect your tail.
The way things should be between humans. Yes.
Right. There's a Lufberry circle. There's a modification of that called the thatched weave. In the famous Battle of Midway, it was used. And so even though we had the reason I'm bringing this up, the blue airplanes are the American airplanes. The other airplanes here, you could barely see it, are the Japanese airplanes. What happened here is the Americans at the time didn't have the zero of the Japanese. This is the zero, and the American airplane is the F4F Wildcat. The zero was a superior fighter. But what happened was, when you had them flying in this thatched weave, you could take an inferior airplane and you can gain superiority over the zero. Because even though this wasn't very maneuverable and or fast, which are just really bad things, it was tough. It could get shot at and it could survive a lot of hits. And you take that and you have two tough, rugged airplanes, they could mutually protect each other. So it's very much like the Lufberry here. So what's the fighter tactic here is, when one of your buddies is exposed in a debate, you can help him out in the next debate because you've learned his mistakes and you learn from them. That's why I encourage people, creationists, to watch Dapper Dino's channel, because someone else, you have an evolutionist here kind of chasing your buddy's tail, but then you are going to be his friend and you're going to watch where he's making a mistake and you can take him out.
What? By watching the...
Okay, by
how
watching...
is Dapper Dino going to help
what you
see
do is,
where
you
the
watch Dapper
evolutionists...
Dino's channel, you learn where your vulnerabilities, you learn the vulnerabilities.
Oh.
You learn what bad arguments are, and you don't make the same mistake.
Yes, kind of like just being familiar with your enemy.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it helps sometimes when you're in a debate to have a debate partner who can have specialties and expertise in something you're not good at. And
that's for sure.
If I were arguing abiogenesis with Dave Farina, I'd want someone like James Carter or Rob Stadler. I'll tell you what's funny. One clown named Nathan Orman wanted to debate me on abiogenesis. And at the time, he said it'll be tandem. Nathan Orman would have his partner and I'd have mine. It turned out this started because his real target was John Maddox, logical, plausible, probable. And I said, hey, LPP, why not me and, why don't we get Rob Stadler to be my partner in case you can't make it? And John Maddox said, why don't I make him the first partner? I'll just be the backup. When they heard that Rob Stadler, who has a PhD from MIT and Harvard in biomedical engineering, he's an accomplished scientist. MIT PhD. His undergrad was electrical engineering. His PhD was in biomedical engineering, and he wrote a book on abiogenesis. I have 5 degrees. When we announced the creationist team, the other side said we don't want to debate.
I was just going to say, what's that sound a chicken makes? Wow. That means they know.
Oh, and
Sal?
Nathan Orman just never liked me from that point on. And I let him know. I
Means
think
they know.
I let him know I don't think highly of him. And then what happened is I said, okay, hey Rob, why don't we just simulate the debate in terms of like what our opening and middle statements would have been. We did that, and then we were joined by 3 PhD scientists, 3 other PhD chemists and scientists and biochemists to back us up. And yeah, so we did kind of our James Tour imitation and just.
Is that on your channel?
Yeah, you want me to give it to you? Sure.
Well, yeah, put that in your link too.
Okay.
And then, I mean, like you're saying, know your enemy. Even though you had sounds like an awesome team and you would have killed it, I'd still like to hear, what are they going to come up with? What is the enemy's response? And even in sales, they tell you to know their objections and be ready to overcome them.
So let me see. Give me a moment here, and if you have something you'd like to share.
Sometimes, and it sounds like in this case, because it was so stacked, sometimes their objections actually help you because they're so dumb. And actually, that's my biggest prayer, is that the well, they're not going to like me calling them anti-God, that the evolutionists who are trying to say that we don't need a creator, I'm praying that their arguments will just be so clearly illogical that even our children will see, wait, something's wrong with that. That's not right. So that it's not even all dependent on us, but that God will enlist them in the battle by making their arguments so bad that even the children will see it. Or college kids.
Oh, here, I found it. All right, so I'll tell you who was on the show. It was me, and then Rob Stadler, who I described, Ryan Hayes, who is he's a professor of organic chemistry, and his specialty is in nanomolecular engineering. And if you lose these links, just ask me. Cy Gart is a senior biochemist, retired biochemist.
Well, you're going to put them in the description so everybody can see them, aren't you? This is the second one. I don't remember what the first one was.
Yeah. So it is in the description there who these people are.
No, no. The link.
I put it in the side chat. Oh, you want it in the description?
Right.
Okay, let me. It's hard
So
to
that
edit it
whoever,
live. I'll try to remember, and if I forget, you can remind me. So you
okay.
wanted the Sanford interview and the. Let me write myself a note in my to-do list. The Sanford interview and the debate that never was. So okay, let me just let me
Thank
put
you.
that
Yeah, I
Sanford
couldn't
in.
remember that it was the Sanford interview. That doesn't ring a bell with me. I know there was something I asked for.
Yeah, I was explaining how evolutionary theory destroyed his faith.
Oh,
Yeah, and much later he was restored to his faith because he started going back to church. His wife, he and his wife are trying to, just kind of deal. Well, this is public knowledge. I can share it. He said he was going through, they wanted to repair their marriage, and his wife suggested, let's go back to church. And that was the beginning of his road back to Christianity, because I guess he realized he needed something more than his science could answer. And that was the beginning. So he became a Christian. He was a theistic evolutionist, then an old earth creationist, and then a
he
young earth
got
creationist.
green.
Yeah. He got what?
Green. Like your chart.
Oh, yes, all green.
And it didn't
So,
cost him his science.
yeah. So this thing with the thatch weave, so in some debates you want to have a partner. But the nice thing is if you're doing this protracted, like what James Tour did, you can consult other people in the process. So you can either go to books, you can use the internet, and you can go to books, you can consult the internet, but the idea is you have someone supporting you in some way, or you're supported one way.
In the multitude of counselors, there is wisdom.
Well, yeah, yes. When I said, if I said the word green energy, I wasn't referring to the kind that they have now as far as solar. The low energy nuclear reactions, we know that you can get energy from nuclear reactions, but if we can get some that don't have nuclear waste, that'd be interesting. I don't know that, although I don't know that God would want to have that much power put in the hands of ordinary people.
Well, no, but it might have a lot of explanatory power for the problems with radiometric dating.
Yes, we've already been able to do transmutations in the lab, and there's money being invested that. But you have to add more energy into the system than you get out. But we have the benefit that it may solve a young Earth problem for radiometric dating. So going on, so we like Boom and Zoom. We like to have partners and the protracted debate. If it's live, it's great to have a debate partner who complements you. If you do it offline, where you just kind of do what Dapper Dino does or James Tour, it's kind of like the same thing, because you can call people up, you can email them and say, hey, can you help me with this? I'm not really good. Can you point me to a resource? So you can call that the thatch weave tactic or the Luftberry circle or whatever. You just want to have a support, a wingman. So we sometimes call the second guy a wingman.
Two heads are better than one.
Yeah.
Or
Now,
what's that? Ecclesiastes? A
cord
of
is not easily
yes.
broken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're almost getting to the end, thankfully. There is chivalry there seems to be a code of chivalry like there were with knights among fighter pilots. So in World War I, whenever the British or the Americans said, whenever we shot down a German flyer, our planes flew over next day and dropped flowers on the crash site. Okay, that wasn't to mock them. It was to honor them. And the Germans buried young Roosevelt, that's Theodore Roosevelt's son. The Germans buried young Roosevelt with full honors after they brought him down.
Oh my
Reason,
gosh.
yeah, the reason for this fellow feeling is that air combat is single-handed fighting, man to man, and that brings out the best there is in a man. So this is just historical observations here. I don't know, there's just a sense of chivalry, and probably one of the most interesting ones. Here's an example where you've heard of the Red Baron. Have you heard of the Red Baron?
With
In World War-
Snoopy?
Yes. Well, the Red Baron was a historical figure, Snoopy's fiction, right? Everyone knows Snoopy's fiction.
Oh,
But the
don't
Red,
burst my bubble.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. But the Red Baron was a real guy. He had shot down 50, he shot down like I think over 80 British, I don't know if he shot down any Americans, but he shot down over 80 opponents. So you think
Wow.
he'd be a villain, okay?
So he should
He
be a
himself
main
thought,
target.
huh?
He should be our main target.
Yes, well, he was shot down. The first accounts was he was shot down by a British fighter pilot. The modern version is, through some forensic investigation, it's most likely he got shot down by machine guns on the ground. People were shooting up at him. Well, what you're seeing here in this scene is the British buried him with full honors, and you could see the wreaths there. So when they're dropping flowers, they're at, it's like a wreath, but he died on Allied soil, which I presume would be over France. And they got his body, and you could see the full military honors that they're extending to him. So there's some chivalry in air combat. And the Red Baron's name is Richthofen. His last name is Richthofen, Manfred von Richthofen. And so after the war was over, I guess his remains were gathered and brought back to Germany, and you could see there's a huge memorial for him. But the compelling thing is even his enemies honored him. And so in debate, we don't have to vilify and demonize the opponent. We can respect them, and we can have a fight, I'm just pointing that out because when we study military history, it is kind of shocking that sometimes opposing sides will admire the other guy, the enemy. And there have been accounts where fighter pilots who had fought in the same battles against each other, they meet after the war and they become like brothers. I can't explain it. It's beautiful on some level that these
I'm
guys
finding it repulsive. I love Grace, but if they're killing our people and
I can't explain it. I can't explain it because these guys,
defending Nazism, I wouldn't want to honor them.
well,
I'd
I
want
can't,
to spit on them.
well, I'm just giving a little history here. We had
I know,
war
and I'm just
and
spouting.
yeah, I just find it compelling that actually some of them, a lot of them were not Nazis. A lot of them felt they were fighting for their homeland.
You're right. That's true. That's definitely true.
Some,
and they didn't know what Hitler was doing behind the scenes, some of them.
Yeah. So I will say this, that the Allies who met the German fighter pilots, they started to really care for each other. And I just found it compelling that these people in Mortal Kombat would one day meet and end up being friends. It's like, yeah, there's almost comical accounts where the pilots who actually shot at each other and managed to survive ended up being friends. So, you know, I'm not
It
approving.
reminds me of my father. He used to watch sports and he loved tennis. And they'd play really hard against each other. And then at the end of the game, they'd go up to the net and shake each other's hand.
Yeah. And in the United States military, even though we fought the Germans, a lot of tank armored fighting units, they have pictures of Erwin Rommel. Because
You are really,
Erwin
really,
Rommel,
really, really fuzzy right now. Your audio's really bad.
that could be restream. I'm hearing your audio is kind of breaking up on me too. So it could be, I don't know what's going on. So, well, we're almost at the end. So Rommel has been celebrated by US military commanders, and he was the enemy, but they admired his skill. So maybe that's what I'm putting this on the table to say, okay, I'm not approving of the side that they were on, clearly, but they had skills.
Yes.
And that's what I was getting to. So one of the famous ones on the German side, okay, Patrick Alexander weighed in here. Okay, said my audio is fine. Okay, well, we're almost done. So we had pictures, I said military, US military has pictures of Erwin Rommel. Even though he was our enemy, he's admired and revered for his skill. And the US military tank doctrine has adopted a lot of Rommel's knowledge. So that's why he's celebrated, not because, the US military is approving of all the people, of all the Americans that the Germans killed. That's not the point. Is we learned from Rommel. And so in Desert Storm, the battle in the war with Iraq, there was a lot of Rommel's tactics used. And then we have Erich Hartmann. You can see he's a sweet looking guy. He's a killer. If you saw him up in the sky near you, you ought to tremble. That could be your death sentence. His name's Hartmann, and you can see here he has this cute little heart on his, the little heart on his airplane. That sweet little boyish smile, and he was very young. He was very young when to go off to war, and he had, I know, there's a little feminine touch here. He had a tulip painted. That's the tulip paint scheme on his airplane. So you have the little heart here. You have the tulip, but he was a killer. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
For the big fry?
What?
Was that to butter you up for the big fry? Get you to think that he was sweet and soft?
Yeah. So he shot down 352 opponents. 352. Even the Americans today, the US military will say he's the greatest fighter pilot ever. So what were his tactics? Boom and zoom. There's this book called The Black Tulip, because that's the black tulip that you saw here. and that was about the life of fighter ace Erich Hartmann. After the war, the Germans adopted the paint scheme. You could see the tulip here and the tulip there, in honor of Hartmann. He became a general in Germany after the war and part of NATO. So he actually got on our side.
Yay.
And there's there's the Red Baron. His photo is on a Eurofighter. And, you know, kind of the kind of elements of the tulip paint scheme. Yeah, the guy was death in the air. Yeah, Hartmann was, he's a sweet guy, but you don't want to face him in battle. Now, the funny thing is, now there's also Lee Chenault. He was head of the Flying Tigers in World War II. He's an American, and he developed an interesting tactic. So I showed you the boom and zoom tactic. His airplanes, I was talking about debating according to your strength. You attack the guy with your strongest point where his weakest. And the American planes were not very fast or maneuverable, but they had big guns and they had lots of armor. So the pilots here, you can't really see it, but the windshields, I think, were bulletproof, and they are surrounded by lots of armor plating. So even if their airplane took a lot of bullets, the pilot would be protected, and a lot of the engine would be protected. So that made them heavy and slow, but they were protected, and they also had lots of guns. There are guns here, I think guns there, powerful guns. Those were their strong points. The Japanese that they were facing, like this plane's called an Oscar, is very lightly made. I almost call it like a paper airplane. And it didn't have very good guns. But they were very agile and fast. What you did not want to do is get into a dogfight. You don't want to get into a dogfight. So Lee Chenault said, okay, you have strong points where he's weak, and you have weak points where he is strong. So don't get in a fight where he can turn the tables and use his strengths against your weaknesses. And so the tactic he developed was actually very simple. So when you see him and you're on, you either boom and zoom, but if you're not in a position to do a boom and zoom attack, you fight head on, nose to nose. And all you do is you point your airplane at him, and you hope he points his airplane at you. And you come and you just go guns blazing, and you just keep shooting at each other. But because you're better armored here, he's going to disintegrate. And that's all they did. I know that seems
Just
kind of mean.
face him nose to nose and shoot.
Face nose to nose and shoot. And they said, do not get into a turning fight. Do not get into a dog fight. And that was, and you'll hear that again, my closing slide will say, that's the way to fight a war, either tail on or nose on. So what's this about? It's like, okay, if you're going to enter a debate, have a strong point where you can just bulldoze the opponent. You need to have some advantage over them, and so have some good arguments, learn something. And I used that tactic against James Bannard. I came prepared with a lot of data he wasn't aware of, and I just blew him away. That was kind of a nose-to-nose attack there. Okay, so now Erich Hartmann, he got very successful because he fought a certain kind of airplane, and Erich Hartmann was German, and he fought especially against the Russians. He didn't fight Americans very often. When he fought an American once, he actually lost. He survived the fight, and I'll talk about that. So this is what Hartmann had to say about this particular Russian airplane. He said, well, you can't believe it, but the Sturmovik, which was their main ground attack aircraft, flew like B-17s in formation and didn't attempt to make any evasive maneuvers. And all they had was one pea shooter in the back of each plane. And he's talking about this little pea shooter here. The pea shooter was no threat unless they had a very lucky hit on you. I didn't open fire till the aircraft filled my whole windscreen. If I did this, I would get one every time. And so a lot of his kills were against this one. And so it was his tactic. It was a variation of boom and zoom. He would come down from where the sun was. So a lot of times the tail gunner couldn't see him, wouldn't want to look up there at the sun. So he came down with this from the sun along with his wingman here. Oops, sorry. Had a wingman, and both of them would fly down, and they'd go very fast, like a boom and zoom. They'd get underneath. So this whole time, this guy wouldn't see them. He'd get underneath, and he said he'd get really close till it filled the whole windscreen. That means he was really close. And then he would shoot. And he said, I'd get one every time. So he's doing a boom and zoom, and he's attacking them from where they're not expecting and where they're weak. So in my debate with James Downard, I started using arguments and angles to eukaryotic evolution he didn't anticipate. So I first got him head on, because I actually even knew citations by memory. And I said, you're wrong about that. Here's why. And I cited it from memory. I got him in a head on, and then I started attacking him with from angles he didn't expect, which was nuclear localization. And you've seen those nuclear localization videos, where things are going in and out of the cell nucleus.
Yes.
Yeah,
Passwords.
he was obliterated. That was the best debate I ever had.
You should link that also.
Okay, let me put that in the notes. I think you watched it, but I'll link to it. Because you sent me a letter after you watched it. But I'll put it I'll put it in the video description. So that's Erich Hartmann. Let me see. Now he did lose one fight. He actually ran out of gas, and these are American fighters here. 8 of them encountered him. He ran out of gas. He said he had nothing to do except bail out, and he bailed out. Now, I said now there's a tradition of chivalry. This is kind of bittersweet. Because there's a tradition of chivalry, the Americans could have come after him and shot him while he's bailed out. But it's like shooting someone who's wounded. It's just like, you can do that, but it just doesn't seem sporting. In retrospect, they probably should have shot him because he lived. He parachuted in friendly territory for him. They recovered him, so he survived the battle. He went on to kill other American pilots. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, if he had fallen into American hands, you don't have to shoot him, you just capture him. But the Americans did do a lot. It's not well known, but they actually did shoot a lot of German pilots when they bailed out.
But not the king.
I'm sorry?
But not the king. They admired
not
him.
The king. They respected him so much. You know what the guy did? One of the fighter pilots here, he flew right into Hartmann and then turned just at the last moment. Hartmann thought he was going to get it, but he didn't. And the American fighter pilot saluted him. Saluted him.
I don't
rather
know
than-
if you used to watch TV. Whenever they would have, they're trying to kill the bad guy, and then they get the bad guy in a really compromised position and they show mercy.
Yeah.
And I was always like, no, he's gonna get up and kill you. You have to pull the trigger right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and there have been, by the way, instances where the Germans had done the same. They would salute. They would salute a vulnerable airman. So there was chivalry on both ends. Hard as it is to believe, it seems the Germans showed a little bit more chivalry because the Americans were doing a lot of shooting pilots that bailed out. And the funny thing is the British didn't like that. And so what would happen is when you had a situation like this, where you had a German pilot and you had the Americans here, the British would sometimes circle around to protect the German pilot because they didn't want the Americans gunning him. Okay, so I know that sounds funny, but remember this picture earlier of the British with Manfred von Richthofen here. See, you see they had so much respect and a sense of chivalry. It's like, no, you don't do that. So they'll even have all these wreaths and a state burial for the king enemy, Yeah, I just find that compelling. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just find it compelling that these guys are mortal enemies, but they will.
So you're saying to learn from the strengths of the opponent.
And weaknesses. Learn where you're weak. Learn where you're weak. I'm saying learn where you are weak. And don't let the opponent get you where you're weak.
Yes. But the way they were honoring the opponent.
I think the point of that was we don't have to. We can show some honor. We're just fighting the fight. We don't have to make it personal.
Yeah, well, and you had said something about learning from Dapper Dino as well, and that's kind of the same thing. Learn from their strengths, not to learn how to be better by watching.
Right.
Be humble enough to admit.
Yes, and also he and I have a good relationship. There's no need to make this personal. It's like, okay, Dapper, I'm gonna, you know what I'm about, and I know what you're about, and what you stand for. But we can honor each other. We can be civil to each other.
Yes.
Even when he makes a mistake, I don't have a drinking show on about him, and I don't think he'll have one on me. He'll disagree, but I think he despises Kenthoven, and so do I. So, but Dapper Dino and I respect each other. I'm not going to lampoon him. I don't expect him to lampoon me. He'll just say, Sal and I disagree, but he's not going to make a drinking show to mock me. He'll say, I disagree with that, but he doesn't mock me, and I try not to mock him.
Okay, so you're advocating for civility, which I would highly agree with.
Yeah. Now if the guy's a scum, if my opponent's a scumbag, I don't feel like I owe him anything.
I know, I heard you use moron.
Yeah. And you said that's Kent Hovendish, but if I think someone's a bad guy, I'm not going to treat him like he's an angel. He's a bad guy. I mean, if someone is abusing women, I'm not going to be very kind to him. I see no reason to be civil to him.
Well, and that would be what I was objecting to. And you're going to honor the guy who's killing you? No.
Well, I think on some level, when I've heard the fighter pilots' testimonies talking about, they said, well, that guy was just fighting for his family. just like I am.
It kind of really screams morality.
Well, it depends on how you perceive your opponent. If you really do think he's a bad guy, then yeah, you don't treat him civilly. But if you think he's fighting for his family rather than an evil cause, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And
Um,
when I was watching documentaries on World War II, they were saying that, especially in the beginning, the Germans didn't know what Hitler was doing to the Jews.
well, and I think where it really plays out is in the American Civil War,
Yeah,
where
for
there were a lot of
sure.
Southerners that didn't approve of slavery, but they were fighting for state rights. The leadership was pretty corrupt and fighting for slavery, and they were just evil people. But there were honorable men, especially the poor young teenagers that were fighting. And then
And
so
they
you'd see
were
these,
cousins and brothers in the
yeah,
opposite uniforms.
yes. And then so after the war, you'd see pictures of the people that had fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. And we actually have rare video footage of these gentlemen, like in the 1920s, they had actually fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. And just when they started to have motion pictures, they filmed some of these. It was very touching. You could see these guys hugging each other, and it's like, yeah, I understand you're fighting for what you believed in, and I was fighting for what I believed in. So with me and Dapper Dino, it's nothing personal that we disagree, and I would say the same for me and Erika and me and Dr. Dan. But there are people on their side of the issue that I don't want to deal with. I've banned them from my channel.
Right.
And if some of those come on my channel, I think I'll toss them instantly. There are people on the creationist side I've tossed. And I think they're bad actors. So, but if I feel someone is acting honorably, I will reciprocate.
Yeah, I think if I had a debate with any of the people you just mentioned, I'd be happy to shake hands after the debate.
Yeah.
But after the courtroom battle with Kent Hovind, he will be seeing my backside, not my hand.
Or Steve Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
And after what happened to you, there's some creationists I don't want to talk to. They behave so badly.
SFT?
Yeah, they behave so badly toward me. I'm just like, I'm done with you.
Yeah. I've been very disappointed in some of the Christian stuff I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah. So,
Well, now you can say so-called Christian.
so this was, I try not to debate someone. That's for the Lord to know. But some people, it's kind of scary how they are. But anyway, I never had a dogfight. I usually got head on or tail on. So head on was, I showed you the head on attack, and the tail on means hopefully the guy didn't even know you were there. So these are, I never had a dogfight. I usually got head on or tail on. They never saw us coming. That's the way to fight a war. That's what I'm trying to tell the creationists. Don't get in a dogfight. And I said, don't dogfight Erika. So fight or cooperate. That's also another thing. Is the debate to fight or cooperate? So another way to do a debate is don't make it a fight. Identify if they're a friend or a foe. And I think Dapper Dino's a friend. So one thing we argue about is this universal common ancestry, the phylogenetic tree, they call it. And here's another representation of the phylogenetic tree here on the left. The creationist model is created kinds, major independent origin of major families. So we believe that humans are very special. They're created kind. And then they have like plants and other kinds of animals, insects. However, the evolutionary view of universal common descent is we had that first life. Darwin said it might have been created. He said in one publication, in another publication, he said maybe not, but it all descended from one common ancestor, according to their theory.
Well, and it does seem inherently obvious that a non-living thing could never become a living thing without
Yes, a
a
miracle,
deity.
right? So, whereas Erika likes to argue, particularly here, human-chimp ancestry. I like to argue right at the base of the tree. The first would be abiogenesis, which even though it's not strictly part of evolution, I still argue it and say, well, the way I frame it is if you needed to make the first life, if it needed a miracle, then evolution wouldn't even happen without a miracle. And then I'll point out you need a miracle for eukaryotic evolution and all these protein evolution, major protein family evolution. So from the very beginning and throughout all of evolution and universal common ancestry, you need miracles. You just don't want to admit it.
So how do you help them? Well, if I can't make the connection, maybe they can't make the connection that if if the first life required a miracle, how does that logically follow that the other ones, each step of
Sure.
evolution would need a miracle too? I mean,
Oh,
I obviously would think that.
no, let me clarify. It doesn't logically follow. But my point is, without life, there's no evolution. And
Yes, I think that's what you
evolution,
meant to say, right?
that's what I
Yeah.
meant to say. Yeah, thank
So
you.
let's say that again so that we can learn to say that.
Without life, there's no evolution. You need a miracle to get it started. There's no evolutionary theory without a miracle,
So
because
if
there
you
would be
have
no life.
one, why not more?
That's the other thing, is once you admit one miracle, why don't you admit more? And the next miracle would be eukaryotic evolution. It's just devastating. And I only covered the tip of the iceberg in my debate with James Downard.
Well,
And I
and
think it's
even prokaryote and eukaryote are not simple life forms. They have multiple parts that have to be
right,
there.
exactly. But eukaryotes even more.
Yes.
And the theory is the eukaryote evolved from the prokaryote because the prokaryote's simpler.
Yeah.
And I said, look at all the miracles you'd need. And I just showed the import-export membrane-bound organelles, and I could have shown more, but I think that smacked
Wait.
them silly. And I don't think he recovered from that. I invited him back on the channel if he wanted to talk about it. Like, okay. He's a good sport, though.
So the
That was a
question
civil discussion.
is always, well, where did that come from?
Yeah. So, for one thing, Erika and I agreed not to debate because we're friends. The other thing is just even her expertise is up here. Mine is down here. We'd be talking past each other anyway.
But I like your point that without the miracle at the bottom, you would never have any of the stuff at the top.
Exactly. And when I debate eukaryotic evolution, it's down here at the base. You're cutting the phylogenetic tree at the base. Everything else will collapse, so to speak, figuratively speaking.
If
It's
they
like,
can make that logical connection.
right. It's like, I've just proven it's failed here. You need a miracle. So you can't, you could still claim universal common ancestry, but you can't claim it happens naturally. That's also a non sequitur. Just because you can show that there are identical DNA sequences doesn't mean it happened, all of this happened naturally. And that was the point of showing the eukaryotic evolution. I said, we share some genes with bacteria, but it doesn't mean the other genes evolved naturally. That's a non sequitur.
I've never heard that argument.
Okay. I need to make it then.
Or
I
I'm
don't think
not.
I wasn't very explicit. I kind of alluded to it in my Steve McRae video.
Is it the one where we have similar component parts and so therefore?
Yeah. Well, welcome. Okay, so this is a testable hypothesis. You're saying he thinks science will continue to find more answers. But thank you for the kind words. You're still my favorite creationist, though. Thank you. So we'll just move on. So I'm just saying, okay, first off, I asked the question, is friend or foe? And it's like, okay, why shouldn't I try to be friends with Erika when she's a great person? And are we going to be combative or we cooperate? And I said, the way to settle arguments is to find more data. And one angle that I'm taking now is you'll definitely get the orchard here if the fossil record is young or the earth is young. There's no need to argue about human chimp ancestry if the fossil record's young. There's just not enough time. Even Dapper Dino said if the earth is young, the orchard model is correct.
Now I'm having trouble following that because they believe that the orchard model is what we see in the fossil record if you believe in the Cambrian explosion.
Well,
But they're still saying it's not young.
Okay, but if the world is young, that means there's the fossil record is not old, it's young, for one. That means the Cambrian explosion never really happened. It's an illusion that all the fossils were buried about the same time.
Well, obviously that's what I believe, but I'm trying to follow
How we get there.
what you were saying.
Okay, if the world is young, there's not enough time for evolution to happen.
Right.
That means,
which implies the orchard. Okay.
right. So automatically, if the world is young, the orchard model is the explanation for the patterns of life. That means it's common design, not common descent. That means the reason we look similar to chimpanzees is God made us that way. We didn't evolve that way.
Yep. There's only so many elements that he had to use to create. We're made out of the same stuff. We all need to eat. We all need to breathe. We all need to walk.
Well, it's not just that. As I said, God made these as model organisms so we could understand ourselves, so we don't have to abort human fetuses to do embryonic stem cell research.
Yeah, so we can use rats and worms and yeast and
Yes, absolutely. And
I
so
think that's very interesting. You were the first person I ever heard that from.
I think so too. I'm the first person to really throw it on the table. And it's like, well, it really hit me. I found out the name of that cell line. It's called HEK. When I did a report on that for my class at the NIH, it just broke my heart. And I said, I began to thank God every day for the rest of his creation. And I said, that's an Old Testament theme. the lamb that were sacrificed for our atonement in the Old Testament was a picture of the true Lamb of God who died for us so that by his stripes we could be healed. And I like, yeah, there's a very Christian theme then in the way creation is made. By their
Providing the
suffering.
substitute.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's written all over creation, the sacrifice of Christ, according to my theory here. And so it's not just that God gave these creatures similar to us because like you said, they need hands and feet. It really is so we could understand our own biology, and that speculation is going to be strengthened by some of the work I'm doing right now on called direct coupling analysis. You can Google that. It's miserably difficult, but it basically says we can't do some of our really spectacular science and understanding protein biology if some of these creatures didn't exist as a matter of principle. It's like it had to be designed to help us. We wouldn't be able to do some of the things we're doing now unless these creatures were designed to help us.
Wow.
Yes, wow. And we actually do know this on several levels, like we heard about for the biology guys out there, the polymerase chain reaction that enables us to do gene sequencing. God provided a thermophilic bacteria that we find like in hot springs, and God gave us the tools to understand our biology. We wouldn't have the advances now if there weren't that little bacteria somewhere out there, and there are all sorts of little things like that. So anyway, on the way to try to prove that the Earth is young, again, from directions they're not expecting, I'm going to actually start to review some stuff with nuclear physics here. This is a radioactive decay chain. They've tried to explain radioactivity in terms of, hang on, let me take care of it. I have to blast the bot here. Zapped him. Okay. In terms of contamination or radioactivity from uranium, and I think that can be refuted. It'll take a little work. It's going to take some math, and it'll take a while to get through it. But this is what I call the...
Wait. What did you say? What can be refuted?
Okay, so there's radiocarbon in dinosaur bones. There's carbon-14 in dinosaur bones.
Yeah, and they're saying it was leached in.
Yeah, that can be refuted.
With the gelatin, collagen?
Yes. But not only that, there's other arguments that will refute the leaching in. But especially what you said about the gelatinization. The second thing is argument they'll say it's contamination because there's uranium there and the radiation causes transfers, confers, the better word, confers radioactivity to the carbon.
What?
Okay, so this, what I'm showing here, is trying to refute that.
What?
Because there can be neutrons that come from this decay chain, and it can, I think if it strikes nitrogen, you can make C14 or vice. There's a decay chain that can cause it, but you're not going to get enough. And they keep saying that.
I remember hearing just briefly about this and thinking to myself, well, that means that decay rates are mutable. Not
well, you see that's again, they'll use an argument when it's to their convenience, and then they won't use it when it's against them. So when they use the leaching argument, I'm just like, okay, so you use carbon-14 to date supposed human ancestral bones, right? And you don't use the leaching argument because it doesn't serve your timeline. But you could, if you're going to use it for dinosaurs, why don't you use it for humans? Not to mention the leaching argument won't work, not just because of the collagen, but the leaching itself has a half-life, and if it didn't happen recently and globally, it wouldn't work. It would be carbon blank at this point. So there are problems with, but I want to have a discussion like that, and we can either be combative or cooperate. And I could just talk to the guys that have expertise in this, and I want to find out if you think my reasoning's correct. So there's no reason for me to just say I'm definitely correct. Why expose myself to being shot down? I said, let's just talk. So no need to be, so that's why, don't get in a dogfight. And that also means maybe you don't want to be in a fight whatsoever at all. You want to have a discussion. And that's what I think we'll have. But I have a feeling we might prevail. The creationists will prevail in this discussion. And it's with calculations like the ones depicted here. And that'll take a long time to get through. And we'll talk about nuclear decay. So, as I said, arguing more doesn't settle debates. Getting relevant data does. Arguing
Sal,
doesn't, yeah.
if you shoot that one down, everything collapses. If you shoot holes in radiometric dating that are undeniable, that the whole card house falls.
And we're chipping away at it. So this wasn't anything I wrote. This is by Russell Rada. But we're getting, and then this one's by Brian Nichol and Walter Brown's the primary author of this. I looked at this, I said,
Wait a minute, the same Walt Brown that did the canopy theory?
He doesn't, hydroplate theory.
Is it Walt Brown that does the book In the Beginning?
Yeah.
I didn't know he was working with radiometric dating.
Oh yeah. He's a pioneer on this.
And he has qualifications for it?
That wasn't his PhD at MIT. By the way, he's a PhD from MIT in mechanical engineering, but he's very smart. He got it in only 2 years. That's how bright he was. That's not easy to do.
I can't believe he's still working on this. He's like 80 years old.
Yeah. Well, Brian Nichol probably is following on, and some people need to pick up on this. Because we've known, even I knew, because when I took cosmology, there was a problem with nucleosynthesis models where they say, okay, so just for the reader's benefit, these elements here, so you have the really light elements, and then you have helium, you have iron, the really heavy elements are out here. It's very hard to make these in stars and explosions and supernova or whatever else. But the alternative, we can postulate either they got created or Noah's flood made them. I'm of the opinion Noah's flood caused the creation of a lot of uranium. We have 70 times more uranium on the continental shelves, like say the United States or wherever, than we do on the seafloor. And we may not have any uranium kind of underneath us, below the seafloor. So that would suggest that be interesting if the uranium we find was then caused by Noah's flood.
Are you familiar with the Great Unconformity?
A little bit.
It's kind of what you were saying about the seafloor, but it made me wonder if what you're saying is that we only find uranium in the sedimentary rocks and not under the Great Unconformity where they are not sedimentary. their bedrock?
I don't know that I don't know the answer to that question. We know the absence of it in the seafloor. The relative absence by a factor of
Right.
70, which is huge.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and then we have Lenski's experiment, and it really wasn't good for evolution of complexity, despite the claims and the hype. We look at it carefully, and Lenski himself was co-author of this paper. Mutator genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains in a long-term experiment with bacteria. So they had this bacteria that kept hyping, look at all the fitness gains. And really, all it was doing was just making more of the bacteria, but there's actually, they were losing genes. This was, if I wanted to make an experiment, if I wanted to hype an experiment that showed that bacteria could actually evolve complexity, I wouldn't want to be citing an experiment where it started losing genes.
Well, and it's still a bacteria.
And it's still bacteria, but it's important to point out it didn't really gain substantial amounts of complexity. It got a little bit of extra function, but it wasn't with, it's like an addicted gambler. He'll get a little bit of a win here and there, but then overall he's losing. This is what's happening here.
Well, and
so
like you said, it gained in, like it made more of itself, but it itself was still unchanged.
It made more of itself, but with lots of defects.
Wow.
Because it says right here, mutator genomes decay, and that meant it lost genes.
So that's basically what you were saying. If you define fitness as making more of itself instead of growing into a different
gaining more ability.
Yeah.
So like, what are defects? Like in humans, we have like color blindness. We have people with various other heritable diseases. That's often because genes got disabled or compromised. And so with the bacteria here, they're making more of themselves, but they're getting more birth defects, so to speak. That's not, strictly speaking, it's not birth in the way humans have it. They have what they call fission or whatever. They were losing genes, and the ones that were making more of themselves were the ones that had lost genes. So we're almost.
How could they miss this?
Oh, because of the hype. But at least the scientist here, Lenski himself, was a co-author of this paper, so he had at least some semblance of integrity to admit the truth. And this does not look good for evolutionary theory. So I say cooperate, frame the debate as a cooperation, not combat. Explore data, not argue abstractions, and I've already said that. Abstractions invite dogfights, avoid dogfights, and that's the final slide. If you get into a fear fight, your tactic sucks. Your tactics suck. If you're not cheating, you're not trying. And Flash Gordon here, he said, I never had a dogfight. I usually got head on or tail on. They never saw us coming. That's the way to fight a war. And I think we're the only people left on this show. We've actually gone longer than I should have, which is almost 4 hours. So I'm sorry. We had too much fun.
Thank you for allowing me to interject my questions.
Yeah, well, that meant you were interested, and that's good. Oh, Patrick Alexander's still here. Well, good night, everyone. And I got to get up at 8 to go to church, so I'm not going to get a lot of sleep. Shame on me. But I think this was an important discussion to have.
Can we pray?
Sure. I'll open and you can close.
Okay.
Dear Lord, I spent a lot more time on this than I anticipated. Thank you for the fun discussion. Please protect Cindy where she is and bring more friends who will sacrifice for her and whom she can trust and who won't stab her in the back anymore. I pray for her friends who still might be at Dinosaur Adventureland, who are suffering through there. Lord, I pray for the friends who have come to her side, especially for the witnesses that stood up for her in court. And Lord, just I pray your protection. Dear Lord, also help me in all my endeavors. And there's some things I shouldn't say on air, and you know what other prayers I have, but I'm not going to say it on air. And Lord, bless our work in Jesus' name.
Yes, Lord, thank you for you know all our needs and that you allow us to come to you, tell us to come to you with all our cares. And Lord, I just want to pray for the creationists that are trying to contend for the faith. And I want to pray for the arguments of the other side, Lord, that they would get so ridiculous that the kids even would see this isn't making sense. There's got to be a God. And Lord, I ask that you would help us make progress in the radiometric dating exploration. I also pray for scientists that we can be friends instead of foes and that we can debate truth and not just power and victory, that we could be iron sharpening iron. And we just pray your truth would spread and that you would reach those of your loved ones, Lord, and our loved ones too. Thank you that you loved the world so much that you gave your Son. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Good night, brother.
Amen. God bless you.
You
Take
too.
care.
Bye-bye.
Good night.